Welcome back to the Tracy Take. I'm Tyler here with my brother Brian, and today Brian and I we are breaking down our top 100 prospects in this year's draft class. And so a lot of names you guys are going to be familiar with, but I think we just want to kind of put our take in it and the players that we feel are going to be the most valuable as well. So we're going to start off at 100, work our way up all the way to number one. We're going to have a full long episode if you want to just listen to us in the car. If you don't want to listen to us for that long, I totally get it. So we're going to break up then even these clips as well into other videos at 20 player increments. So be sure to follow this series. And then next week as well, a little housekeeping announcement. We are going to be doing our second 3-round mock draft. It's going to be the first full week now after all the tampering and then all the NFL free agency starting of the new season coming up this week. So it's going to be a fascinating one. A lot of changes, a lot of draft picks going around, a lot of probably different positional ideas I think that Ryan and I will have. So be sure to like, subscribe, and ring the bell to get notified when all those videos come out. Ryan, let's pull this up here. So starting at number 100. This was actually probably one of the tougher ones because a lot of the other names as well, you know, like once you get to 70 or 60 or 50, you're like, okay, these guys are top 100 picks. It's just where do these want to go? Picking number 100, well, shoot, we had 400 other players. That's like, who do we want to include in this list? So we went with Bo Limmer here, going with center from Arkansas. I think one of the things I think that's unique about him specifically, but also more just the positional as well. Interior offensive lineman, I feel like it's not that deep of an interior offensive lineman, especially after the top. I would say the top 100, really. So when you get to here as well, if you're looking for a center or looking for an interior offensive lineman, I think he had a great career at Arkansas. He tested pretty well at the combine. I think he's going to be a consistent guy for teams trying to bolster their interior offensive line. Potentially, too, I mean, just for example, the Eagles as well, you know, like obviously moving on from Jason Kelce. Not moving on, Jason Kelce moved on from them. And just as a thought. And so that's why I kind of want to include this here because I think all 32 teams could agree that interior offensive lineman is probably one of the most important positions in the entire league.
Yeah, and he's a good size. He's 6'5", 310. Maybe if you want to kick him out to guard, put an extra 5-10 pounds on him, and I think he would hold up pretty well. But I definitely play center. He is a little bit more on the athletic side, and like he had a good game this year against Alabama as well. And so you like to see that as that competition gets tougher, that he's able to hold up as well. So let's move on to not pick 99, number 99 on our top 100, and that's Michael Hall Jr., the defensive tackle out of Ohio State. I will say we use the term defensive tackle loosely here. He's a little bit of a tweener at 6'2", 280. He's going to be a defensive end in 4-3 schemes. He's going to be a 3-4 end in those. So kind of going to play over tackles, over guards. But he's more of a pass rushing defensive tackle, but definitely can hold up against the run. Not something that you want to like be putting him in a ton of run situations, but just a really nice option here to go and get some interior pressure here at the end of day 3. If you're one of those teams, it's kind of where I have them going into day 3 early, or end of day 2, early day 3 there as well.
Yeah. So, Javon Baker, receiver from UCF, Chris Abrams-Drain, cornerback from Mizzou, Gabriel Murphy, edge from UCLA. I think all these guys are going to be very unique, kind of in that similar spot as what you're talking about. Gabriel Murphy was across from Laiatu Latu, had a good career at UCLA. Chris Abrams-Drain as well. He's across from Enos Rakestraw this year going up against top SEC competition. Javon Baker, he's a guy that you have been talking about as well. What are some of the things that you like about Javon Baker?
Height, weight, speed, I think is his calling card. He's not going to be the most technically refined route runner. He has good hands. He's good in jump ball situations, but at 6'2", 210, I think he ran in the low 4.5s, which is pretty good for that size. And I think he would be an earlier day 2 pick if this wide receiver class was not just absolutely loaded. I mean, you think of the guys that are going to be going like early in round 3. You have the Brendan Rices, the Tez Walkers, the Malachi Corleys, and Javon Baker is up there in conversation with some of those guys just in terms of his actual physical ability. But I just think he maybe isn't quite as refined as some of those guys. And this wide receiver class as a whole is just absolutely loaded. You're going to have guys going in the 4th round that are going to be probably starting for some of the teams that they get drafted by. So an interesting one there. Another guy that I like, Chris Abrams-Drain. He's a little bit undersized, so he's probably going to play in your slot, but he's a really twitchy athlete, can be sticky in man coverage, and has a good feel for zone as well. Gabriel Murphy, another kind of height, weight, speed guy, but I think everybody goes and watches UCLA and they see Laiatu Latu. Gabriel Murphy probably gets a little bit overlooked just in that sense where, yeah, he played with a really solid edge rusher that's going to go at the top of this class, but he himself actually possesses some pretty good pass rush moves, and I think he'll be effective at the next level. So let's move on here to our next 5. We're going to kick it off with Max Melton from Rutgers. I like his size. Going to be 5'11", 195. I don't have his exact combine measurements up, but I believe that is around where he was. So
I think he was 187. I can pull it up.
Here. 187. Okay.
Yeah. So he was. If the internet would pick up a little bit here. So yeah, he was 5'11", 187, 32.18 inch arms.
So, but that's really good length for a corner of this spot. As deep as this wide receiver class is, this cornerback class also has similar depth, maybe not quite the level of talent as far back, but I think we're going to look at some of these late day 2, early day 3 corners, and there's going to be some really good players in there. So Maurice Liufau as well is a little bit more of a thumper of a linebacker from Notre Dame, but just a really good athlete there as well. And he's going to make some teams really happy at the next level.
Yeah. Long arms too. I thought at least 34 and quarter inch arms. And so I'm tested okay at the combine. I would say 4.6, 4.40 is pretty good for, I think, a guy who likes to run downhill. I think the guy that is super interesting to me on where he's going to go is Johnny Wilson. We went back and forth a lot on where we wanted to put him. And I can see him going late day 2. I could see him going early day 2. Early 3rd round. I think his range is gonna be that early 60s to right around here in the 90s, just because he's such a unique kind of guy. He's 6'6", 6'6", 231.
Yeah,
just huge for a receiver. I mean, he's bigger than some tight ends. And so, what teams are going to want to utilize him? Like I could see a team maybe like Detroit. They did just trade one of their 3rd round draft picks away. So maybe if they were wanting to wait on a receiver and get him here, if he ends up falling to them with their 90th pick, or I think their pick is somewhere around 90. I can't remember exactly, but he would just be opposite of something that they have now. Just because you have Jameson Williams and Monroe St. Brown, these speedsters. So
I wouldn't define Johnny Wilson as an explosive athlete, but he has that fluidness to his game that you like, especially for a guy of that size. He's definitely more. He's a lot quicker than like somebody at this size. The NFL is most likely going to be kicked into like a tight end role or like a receiving tight end, and he's quicker than the tight ends that you would put in that, like, kind of pigeonhole in that role. And he's fast enough on the outside to actually stack DBs and like go up in contested catch situation. So I really like him here. Another team, my team, I think they just cut Devontae Parker today at the start of free agency. And if you look, Johnny Wilson and Devontae Parker, especially Devontae Parker later in his career, probably have pretty similar skill sets, just in the fact that they're going to be outside receivers, they're going to be man beaters and jump ball contested catch guys. And so that's another team there. But moving on to Jerrion Jones, the fellow Seminole, he's another really solid corner here, similar to Max Melton, similar size. I believe he does hit that 6 foot mark at 191. So he's going to be able to play a little bit on the outside. He has good length, good athlete. Gets, I would say, a little lost in some zone coverages and is a plus athlete, but nothing elite. I do just like his overall package a lot and what he would bring to teams. And I think he'd be a really good value here in the 3rd round, especially if he goes to a team that can coach him up a little bit.
Yeah. And so lastly, wrapping up the top 90 here, Jaden Hicks, safety from Washington, 6'2", 211. I think it's going to be unique on where he goes. He was another guy. Some boards have him up higher, some like ours maybe a little bit lower. I think once again too, it's I forget which player. It just I think it's Gabriel Murphy. I think just such an offensive heavy class. I think some of the, especially safeties, I think
Yeah,
are going to fall down a little bit more. And I think two safeties are going to be the running backs of the defense, just
yeah,
because a lot of corners or outside corners who don't make it as outside corners, it's easier for them to shift up to safety than it is for safeties and to switch up to corners as well. So I
yeah,
think it's a more competitive position on the probably the most competitive position on the defensive side of the ball, just
yeah.
because
It,
there's a lot of guys I think that can move into that spot.
yeah, and I think you look too. We're in the heart of free agency right now. There were a ton of guys that were released: Jamal Adams, Justin Simmons, like
Everybody from Buffalo.
yeah, all of the secondary from Buffalo. Like there's a lot of guys that are currently looking for spots at the safety position. I will say none of them. Maybe Jamal Adams has the size, but Jaden Hicks, he's going to be that strong safety. He's probably going to play close to the line of scrimmage, coming downhill, and
Yeah.
he likes to hit. So a really solid player there. Let's move on now to the next five here. Kicking off with another safety, Kalen Bullock from
USC.
USC. Yeah.
Yeah. A typo. Yeah.
No, you're good.
Yes.
And then another versatile guy. This guy is going to probably play a little bit further off the line of scrimmage, maybe in a two high. I think he has the speed to play in a single high, but maybe not the instincts just yet to be a single high safety. But another really solid player here. I think this safety class, this sweet spot's going to kind of be in that third and fourth round. Where you're going to get a lot of really talented guys that can come in and contribute. I like your analogy. They're kind of the running backs of the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah. There's a lot of guys like, for example, even Kool-Aid McKinstry, who we're going to get to here in probably about 40 minutes, he's a guy outside corner at Alabama, but I've even heard some talks just with the way he can read, see the offense and be the voice within the defense, but just with his overall athleticism isn't as up to par, just based off reports, that he would be a great safety. And so a guy like Kalen Bullock, or if you're already a safety coming in, it just brings in more competition. So I think here at 89, 88, 87, and 86, it's kind of something similar to what we said with Bo Limmer a little bit earlier, but we've got all interior offensive linemen here. It's just kind of tough to see where they're going to want to fall in, but I think Cooper Beebe, Zach Zinter, Christian Mahogany, Cedric Van Pran all have, I think, unique positives that separate themselves from one another, but then also unique differentiators as well, deficiencies. Like Cooper Beebe, I think, had a great career at Kansas State. Seemed like he tested pretty well at the combine. Does have shorter arms. I know that's a big thing, just measuring wise. So is that going to be something that drops him off?
Not so much at the guard position. I will say, like overall length, I guess, is something that you want to have. But at the guard position, it's not as big of a deal. Whereas the tackle position, when you have those edge rushers and you want to get to their chest before they get to yours, that's always a big thing there. But Zach Zinter probably would be much higher on our list if he didn't get injured at the end of the year. And also Cedric Van Pran, we have him at the top because I think he has the most positional flexibility here. He can play center and guard at an NFL level, whereas the rest of the guys are guards that could potentially play center.
Zinter could play center. He did some time. I can't speak to Mahogany, but
I was more referencing BB and Mahogany just because, and I'm sure they can. It's not that much different technically once when you get into the blocking, like the actual blocking, you're just having to snap the ball. So, but again, Zinter is there. He would be much higher on our board if he didn't get injured. So, but Van Pran was the head of that offensive line at Georgia. Mentally, I think he sees the game very well, and I think some teams are going to be really happy that he falls down here. Also, another thing, I think based off of last year's draft, we both had John Michael Schmitz and Osiris Torrance with like first round grades, and both of those guys fell to like the mid to late second round. I think the NFL as a whole is starting to just, I don't want to say devalue the interior offensive linemen, but they're becoming a little bit more replaceable as the schemes simplify and are spread out. So it's just an interesting kind of dynamic of how high do interior offensive linemen actually go. So let's move on to the last five in our first 20. Here at 85, Jamari Thrash, the wide receiver from Louisville. really a twitchy guy. I believe he has good size. He's 6 foot, probably 185, 190. But he had a really good Senior Bowl. He had a really good year at Louisville, and good hands, good route runner. Maybe not the most explosive athlete. And maybe I think that's why he probably is down on a few people's boards. But I think he still has room to grow. Good hands, just an all around good wide receiver. But in this class where there's all of these really, really good wide receivers, he falls down here to 85.
Yeah. 6 foot 188, ran a 4.46 40, 1.54 10-yard split.
Oh, okay. Actually, that's very explosive.
Yeah. So, but to your point though, with how deep that this class is, it's like I think that those are good numbers. But then when you still have, I know it's the top end of it, but when you have Xavier Worthy running a 4.21, you know, and then there's a lot of other guys in between, even Lad McConkey and Ricky Pearsall, I would say about that same size, and we're about a tenth quicker.
And then you have Xavier Legette, Tez Walker, and A.D. Mitchell that are all 6 foot plus, running 200, running in the 4.3s. Like, that's the kind of class that we're comparing Jamari Thrash to. And so again, here at 85, he's probably wide receiver 12 or 13 on the board. But if you look at last year's class, he's a middle second round pick.
It sucks too, because if he was a junior, like, this would be a perfect class, I think, for him to be like, hey, I'm going to be like the 15th receiver. I actually like here. Let me see if you have our Excel sheet up while I'm going through this. Like, what number receiver is he? But there are just so many guys. Like, he was forced to come into this class. I think it would be very interesting if he would have come in next year, depending on what the class is. But that's where I think he is just, unfortunately, for just how deep this class is. But that being said, though, too, I think this also goes to show that if teams want to wait on getting a receiver, there are going to be guys available. We're even about to get to another one here in a second in Jalen McMillan.
He is receiver 20 on this list, which is kind of crazy to think about, that he's our second or third wide receiver on our top 100, and he's the 20th. He's the third wide receiver that we've gone through so far, because we're going down from 100. So in our top 100, a fifth of the picks are wide receivers.
That's insane.
Yeah, actually, that's just how talented this wide receiver class is. So let's move on to Jeremiah Trotter, the athletic linebacker from Clemson. This is also kind of the height, weight, speed guy, and also I think a position that is being slightly devalued is the linebacker position. There's really three guys at the top of this class. You have Jeremiah Trotter, Edgerrin Cooper, and then Peyton Wilson from NC State. And Jeremiah Trotter, I think, athletically kind of competes with all those guys. He played in the complex defense at Clemson. And on tape, he just has a really good feel for pass coverage. He comes downhill really well. So, again, just a really solid player here. I will say, again, the linebacker position is, I guess, slightly getting devalued as teams go on. I think edge rushers and pass disruptive defensive tackles maybe take the edge over linebackers in the modern day NFL, unless you're Fred Warner. And
well, I also think too, if you go look at so many offenses now run a 11 personnel now, so you got at least three wide receivers. A lot of time too, you got a tight end that can go out and catch, and then you got a running back there. So you can't go and have like a 4-3 type defense now, and then just have four secondary guys. So a lot of times, like, they're going to be running nickel or a 3-down lineman with that new outside linebacker, and you're going to be running with like 5 or 6 secondary guys, like whether it be 1 or 2 safeties and then rest corners. So a guy like Trotter, who is a perfectly fine linebacker, one of the best linebackers in this class, is just a little bit bigger, just maybe a little bit, slower in our eyes. So that's why he's fallen a little bit down on this board. From when I think we first started doing mock drafts, I think he was a borderline potentially first-round pick, or a minimum second round, and for sure second round. I can still see him going in the second round. It's just going to be depending on how teams really like him compared to the Peyton Wilson or Edgerrin Cooper or some of the other linebackers. So let's wrap up here this top 20 with Ray Davis, Jalen McMillan, and Andrew Phillips. Ray Davis, running back out of Kentucky. I remember, I think, when you took me with your in-laws to the Georgia Tech game, and we were watching Kentucky. Who was Kentucky playing that day?
Florida. If you need to know why I love Ray Davis so much, just go watch his highlights versus Florida. That's That's all I have to say.
He was the
Florida
highlights.
Up.
He was
the
highlights.
Insane.
So I think the thing I like about him too is he is maybe 1 or 2 inches smaller than I think the ideal bell cow type back. 5'8", 211. I think he can be your 3 down back. He's
Yeah.
perfectly fine catch the ball out of the backfield. Maybe if you get a little bit better blocking, the pass blocking protection. But as a Falcons fan, I will say the exact same thing about Bijan. So I think that just comes with time. And I think that's something that they can absolutely that any team that gets he'll just slowly develop that over time. But if you're a team that's looking for a 3 down back, I mean, shoot, I'm looking at like Minnesota right here, and so I don't think they have a 3rd round pick. But if they're able to trade back or however get some more picks, I think he'd be a perfect guy if Jonathan Brooks, Trey Benson, Blake Corum, all those guys are off the board. Or maybe you like Ray Davis more than that. Maybe you want Ray Davis more than those guys. So I think he's going to provide a lot of good value for a team. He's going to be a consistent guy that would be a great running back by committee, but he has the capability to be a bell cow.
His build kind of reminds me of like Mike Tolbert is like way too big, but like the way he bounces off tackles and like his contact balance is just it does remind me a little bit of Mike Tolbert, but then he's also a little bit smaller, much more naturally athletic, and just
I would say I can't remember exactly what Maurice Jones-Drew weight was.
Yeah, actually, that's a really good comp.
I think Jones-Drew was 5'6", 5'7", but he's just so small. He's small enough you can't see him behind these linemen. So imagine like the Titans or like whoever gets Joe Alt, then you go get Ray Davis. You're not looking at you can't see Ray Davis. If Joe Alt's blocking you, you cannot see Ray Davis until he hits you. And so, I think it's going to be fascinating on whichever team that he goes to. I think another guy as well will be fascinating is the next guy, Jalen McMillan, because I think he's kind of almost in the Johnny Wilson camp a little bit, not because of his size, but it's just going to be like what team is going to want to use him. I'm trying to think of teams that would want to use him, but I think this is a fair spot for him, considering all the other receivers that are going to be taken before him.
Yeah, and I think you look at how productive he was in that Washington offense. Granted, there was a lot of production to go around, but even with Jalen Polk and Rome Odunze, who we will talk about both of those guys later on in this series, Jalen McMillan, they were still scheming up plays for him. He was still winning in one-on-one matchups, and frankly, he was moved around just as much, if not maybe even more than the other guys. Because being that wide receiver 3, he was the one kind of being put in various situations in different matchups. I really like Jalen McMillan as a prospect. He has good hands. He can win on the route. He can win in jump ball situations. He has good size at 6'1", 192. Like just a really solid prospect here. And then the 81, Andrew Phillips, cornerback out of Kentucky. I will say technique-wise, maybe not the best corner, but athletically, I really like what he brings to the table. He's an elite athlete and just a really, really solid prospect, I think, for teams that are looking that maybe have some cornerback depth, but are maybe looking for a guy that they can come in and develop and mold into their own. I think Andrew Phillips would be a fantastic pick here in round 3 because of these corners. I think he's definitely one of the more athletic ones.
Yeah. Yep. So I agree with that. So that's the first 20 picks here. If you're still with us, greatly appreciate it. Be sure to like, subscribe, ring the bell as we continue going on now to picks 80 through 61. So if you want to hit that next slide here. So be sure to like, subscribe, ring the bell to get notified. We're going to go through 80 through 61 here. Start off with Jalen Wright, running back from Tennessee. Great combine. He actually had a nice little fan base up there at the combine I saw. And so running backs from Tennessee, I guess they're okay. I'm just joking. I'm just joking. Obviously, Saints fans, calm down. But I think he's a guy that's risen up a lot of draft boards. I think he's put himself in that conversation to potentially be up there considered as one of the top running backs. It's if there's going to be a team that just really falls in love with him compared to if they're scared off of Jonathan Brooks ACL or something like that, or if they want another type of running back who I think could be a 3-down back for you guys here as well. Really like what Jalen Wright has to bring to any of the NFL teams.
Yeah. I mean, so he is, I would define him as a speed back, but his speed to power, that's usually a term used for edge rushers, but like he takes that speed and he hits the hole really hard. And he can be in goal line situations. He can be in third down situations. I want to say he's a pretty good pass blocker. Maybe needs a little bit of refinement in that area, but to get a complete back with his level of speed, especially for specific offenses, like if you run a lot of outside zone where there's not a defined gap that he's going to be filling, like getting a guy like Jalen Wright that can just absolutely explode through those offensive lines and whatever hole opens up, I think would be extremely valuable here. And getting him in the third round for some teams, maybe that feels a little rich, but I really like what he brings to the table here. So another guy I like, Sione Vakai, the safety from Utah. Him and Cole Bishop were kind of the heart of this secondary in Utah this year. And man, both those guys are going to be drafted probably in the top 120, 125. Vakai here, obviously, we have in the third round, but I like what he brings to the table. He's very versatile. He comes downhill well. He sees coverages and route concepts really well. And I like, again, this safety class, I like what they all bring to the table here. So
yeah. And so it's going to be unique to see where all those guys fall, as we talked about already with some of the other picks. And so Brendan Rice, receiver from USC, son of Jerry Rice, had a good combine. Actually, I really like he had a nice little like shoestring grab, even in front of his father. So he's got the athleticism. I think he's just going to be a solid receiver in the NFL. I would say maybe I don't want to say David Bell's not a solid receiver, but I feel like he'll maybe even more like kind of like an Elijah Moore light, so to say. I think he's just going to be consistent. I think he's a guy that you can lean on, can get you 600, 800 yards in a season, and be a good receiver 3, receiver 2. Maybe like a KJ Osborne. I think that might be a good comparison. And so I'm curious to see where he's going to fall once again with all these receivers, especially these late round receivers as well, with how much great talent there is early on. There's not really much to say about them that stands out.
With Brendan Rice, he is not the polished guy that I think you want, but I think you look at his physical gift, 6'3", 215, ran well at the combine, and like you look at what you could hopefully turn him into. And the biggest thing that I got from him at the Senior Bowl was just his mentality. He's a dog, and he wears that chip on his shoulder, and he's a great athlete. I think he just needs to be a little refined. He kind of reminds me a little bit of like a Michael Pittman, but with like more outside prowess and more outside dominance. And like, again, I've talked a lot about how deep this wide receiver class is. He, in a normal class, would be at the beginning of the second round, maybe middle second round, which is where Michael Pittman Jr. was drafted by the Colts. It's just this class is so freaking good that he falls all the way down here. So, next up, the first quarterback off the board, Michael Pratt from Tulane. He has some really good tape from a few seasons ago. I believe he tore his ACL, and then when he came back this year, he just didn't quite look the same. A lot of guys we're talking about potentially at a few seasons ago, we're potentially talking about how he could be a very solid developmental prospect in early day 2, maybe late day 1. And now he's kind of here in the middle of day 3 or day 2, potentially the beginning of day 3, just kind of depending on the value here. I think there's a few other guys in this class. There's 6 guys at the top, and then you have Spencer Rattler and maybe a few others that I think would be in contention for a role like him. But he's going to be a little bit more of your pocket passer. He is athletic enough to move, but he's not a Drake May where he's really going to lead the team in rushing or have any significant amount of rushing yards. He's really going to have to be the cerebral assassin from the pocket where he dices up defenses that way.
Yeah. No, he's a good project. I think for teams to develop. I could see a team maybe like Denver, if they figure out the quarterback situation elsewhere in free agency, as we are recording this Monday night on March the 11th. So if he want to take him there and maybe develop as a project, who knows? So to say, whatever happens with Denver, or just some other options. And so last on this page, though, here, Troy Franklin. I know, Ryan, you have a lot of opinions on him, but he's fallen a lot on our boards here. I think I would maybe rank him a little bit higher, but I think we compromised a little bit on this number here. What are some
Yeah.
of your concerns with Troy Franklin?
Size. He doesn't quite have this. Given his lack of size, he doesn't quite have the speed to really make up for it. He doesn't really run great routes on tape. He doesn't look fluid all the time, and I don't know. I just am not really a fan. I will take the blame for having him all the way down here in the middle of the third round. I was the one that was pushing for him to possibly even be further down the board, and I just am not a fan. Like if I were a GM on a team, I would totally scratch Troy Franklin off my board and just be like, I'm not touching this player. I just don't like what he really brings to the NFL. Like it's just, I don't know. I just don't. The style of play, maybe I'm also a Patriots fan. Maybe Tyquan Thornton scared the crap out of me, and like those guys are built almost the exact same. And besides running go balls, like I just don't really see what else that he does super well on the field. And he's more of a body catcher. Like he doesn't even really catch the ball away from his body. You saw that in the gauntlet drill at the combine. I know it's the drill at the combine, but like he was just kind of all over the place. He dropped a few balls, like, and he just wasn't. It didn't have it all together, and it was just, I don't know. It was a very disheartening performance from him at the combine, and especially with a guy like him, I already had questions about his tape, and he didn't really do anything to settle my qualms at the combine. So
yeah. No, it's gonna be interesting how some of these Oregon guys fall. Like we didn't even have Bucky Irving on the top 100 yet, just because
he's at like 104. Like
it was like at 104 to be fair. But some of those guys that I think work perfectly in that Oregon Pac-12 offense, and I'm also referring to Bo Nix here as well, who we'll get to here at some point. But curious, though, how it translates over to the NFL. So I'm curious to see Troy Franklin. I would maybe not put him this low, but I think, we'd compromise. So I'm curious to hear everybody's thoughts. So leave a comment down below where you think Troy Franklin should be. So let's move on now to the next five here, starting number 75. Trey Benson, running back from Florida State. And so one of the top running backs in this class, not the stud running back class like how it was last year, but there's still some great names in this class. We've already gone over a couple with Jalen Wright and Ray Davis. Now we got Trey Benson here coming up on Blake Corum and Jonathan Brooks as well. I think Trey Benson's just going to be a guy that he could be a three down back for you. He could be a three down back for you. He could catch the ball out of the backfield. Yeah. He can run in between the tackles. I think he's going to add it. I think he just fits that mold of a traditional. But not traditional, of a modern day running back now. It's interesting. We were even talking about Braylon Allen before, who didn't make the top 100, but like he is to me just like a Derrick Henry. Just that big old beefy guy you want to run between the tackles. And as a defender, you don't want to be hit by him. No. He does not really have much pass catching capabilities. So just like Derrick Henry, he's really a first down, second down kind of guy, or maybe on third and short. Who knows what's going to happen? Trey Benson, though, I think that he's that modern day three down type back. And so Blake Fisher, offensive tackle from Notre Dame, he's another guy as well, too, who had a solid career, solid season at the college, but he was just overshadowed a little bit by the guy playing across from him at the same position. I'm referring to Gabriel Murphy, who was at 97 or something like that.
Yeah.
They had to a lot too. Joe Alt we're going to talk to him here towards the end of this episode. But Blake Fisher was right tackle for Notre Dame. Great career, very solid. I think any team is going to get him here in this middle of the third round type range. He could be late second to late third. I think he's going to get a very solid tackle that you can develop and keep. At minimum, he's going to be a good depth piece to come in.
Yeah, and I really like Blake Fisher. I think technically he has a lot of really solid traits going forward. I think he's just a little bit older. He plays that right tackle spot, which is slightly less coveted than the left tackle spot. And so I like what he brings, and I think this is good value here for anybody looking specifically for a right tackle. And then next up on the board is Brandon Dorlus. We talked a little bit about Michael Hall in the mid-'90s, and to me, Brandon Dorlus is just a plus version of Michael Hall. It's going to be a little bit bigger, going to have a little bit more, I think, versatility, maybe a slightly better athlete. Both those guys are pretty athletic, but it's going to be 6'3", 290. Again, kind of that tweener size, but really solid pass rush moves. It'll be curious to see how he translates to the next level. Sometimes these tweener guys don't do as well, but if you're looking for a situational interior pass rusher, Brandon Dorless, Michael Hall, back end of the third round, I think is where you're really going to find those guys that you're really going to like, unless you go for like a Braden Fisk earlier, although he's bigger than all of these guys. So
yeah,
I really like Brandon Dorless. I think if you get him in the right scheme, he would be a very nice fit for anybody.
yeah, yeah. Let's move on now to Ted Walker. I know you've seen him play live. Actually, you saw him get destroyed at Georgia Tech on that.
Yeah,
hit.
that was
but
he got smacked hard.
God, that was a hard hit. That one hurt me when I was watching on TV. But
yeah,
he's had a very unique offseason. He came in very high potential first round pick. Maybe he is still a potential first round pick. Had an okay Senior Bowl practice. Did not have a good Senior Bowl game. But I think that also being said, though, he had a bunch of targets thrown to him. But then at the combine, I thought that he looked solid as well.
Yeah.
He came in 6'1", 1.5, 193 pounds, 33 1/4 inch arms. Ran a 4.36 40, which for his size is really good. A 1.54 10-yard split. So in general, he was overall athletically was one of the top receivers. I'm curious on your thoughts because I can see him going here, but also, in all honesty, I could see a team like the Chiefs being like, I really like this guy. At the 32nd overall pick, and we know that they need a receiver.
Yeah.
And so
honestly, to me, his biggest question is his hands. I actually think he runs good routes. Once the ball is in his hands, he's good after the catch. And like I like what he does. It's just at the catch point is like where I kind of have concerns, and that's pretty important for the position that he plays. So
and that was actually my thing. I want to address that a little bit on the route running because I think I agree with you on like in routes or out routes, but on some of those deep go ball routes, and of course this is just the Senior Bowl, so it's a timing thing and everything like that. It felt like he just kind of like he would just lose where he was at times, and he would just kind of just fade off,
to me, it felt like he struggled tracking, and then he would just kind of like run straight. He wouldn't do anything to potentially throw the DB off. Sorry.
No. And I think that's great. And kind of what I was trying to say as well. It is the Senior Bowl, so it's his first time getting reps. Now, if it's week 17 and he's been playing with a quarterback for an entire season and that's still going on, okay, we might have some concerns. It's an exhibition game, so maybe we're reading too much into it. But I think it's going to be very unique on where Ted Walker goes because, as we've already mentioned as well, just how many receivers are in this class. So let's wrap up the 70s with Kyrie Jackson here, cornerback out of Oregon. On the bigger side as well, which I find very unique, 6'4", 194. So he is going to be – he reminds me who's the
Tariq Woolen?
No. Well, I don't know how tall Tariq Woolen is, but I was thinking –
Juju
Brents.
Juju Brents. Yeah, similar 6'3", 200 for him. Like if you need outside corners, Kyrie Jackson. If you need size at the outside corner position, Kyrie Jackson is your guy.
I will say as a Falcons fan, Jeff Okudah's moved on. We have Clark Phillips, who's the exact opposite size of Kyrie Jackson. This is in that range, I think, for the Falcons. As a Falcons fan, if you couldn't tell. That if we're going to get a corner, I think he's a guy here in this range. Just because absolutely that you put him across AJ Terrell. Still needs some development, but I think he tested well at the combine. I think that he's done I thought he did well against the Washington receivers, and so as best he could. So I think, to your point, an outside corner for any team looking for him here in this middle third round range, I think is going to be perfect.
Yeah, no, exactly, and he does have some limitations physically, just with that size. The bigger you are, the harder it is to get your hips around, and just the more effort it takes. But athletically, I think he checked all the boxes, not exceeding anything, but again, just going to be a good matchup piece here in the third round. So let's move on here at pick 70. Braylon Trice once was a first round hopeful, and now kind of down here, end of round 2, beginning of round 3 value, I think, just because he's going to be the 6'5", 275 kind of a tweener. He's going to have to be scheme specific. He's probably going to have to be a 4-3 defensive end. And he can crash the pocket and he can crash the pocket and get after the passer really well, and he does really well in the run game. However, at times he does disappear. He doesn't have the greatest amount of bend at that size to really get around tackles and get pressure off the edge. So he does have a really good bull rush. We saw that a little bit in the Texas game in the college football semifinals, but just a really solid player here. He has good play strength. He's going to be ready to play. He just needs to go to the right scheme.
Yeah. There's something about him. I was thinking about it. Is if you go look at like the Dallas Turner or the Jared Verses or even the Chop Robinson as well, they just have that just amazing athletic capability as well. And some of those guys can maybe even improv a little bit more. Kind of like, so if like you're comparing it to a quarterback, it's like those guys are like the Patrick Mahomes. While I look at like a Braylon Trice almost as a more like a Matt Ryan, where I felt like he's like more kind of like it has to be in the system, so to say, where there's that improvisation isn't nearly as much. And so I don't know if that makes sense. It does in my head, and that's the most important thing. But Braylon Trice, I agree with you. I think he's the team that drafts him is going to get a great player that can come in and help contribute. But it is going to be, I think his draft stock has fallen a little bit compared to just some of the other testing and capability from what we've seen from some of the other players. So Blake Corum, running back from Michigan, he went up against Braylon Trice and won several times. Actually, Donovan Edwards might have won a couple more times, but that's neither here nor there. But I really like him as a running back. I'm curious on where he falls because I think if there's one thing he maybe could improve on a little bit, might be the pass catching. And I think one thing going against him, he is a little bit on the older side for running back. So like he's got his rookie contract, so it's going to be, but then he's going to be 27 or 28 at the end of the rookie contract, depending on where he gets drafted. Let me double check that real quick. But what do you like about Blake Corum that might put him a little bit over Trey Benson or some of the other running backs?
To me, he's the best combination of all the skill sets that you want. He's a good receiving back. He has good speed. He can run outside zone. He can run gap schemes and kind of inside zone. He's just a really well put together back. He's a finished product, and they even lined him up or like simulcammed him up with some of the other running backs in the combine, and like his play speed and just how fast he actually gets upfield is really impressive. And I think some team's going to be really happy with him. To me, this is the kind of back that like why you, and not to make fun of the Falcons, but like this back is why you don't draft the Bijan at 8th overall, because you could go do that and then get a guy like Blake Corum here at late round 2, early round 3, and it's like, all right, he does 90 to 95% of things that Bijan does, and so that's like he's like 90 to 95% of Bijan in my eyes.
Yeah, but
Bijan is much better, a much better prospect than him. I'm going to say that very clearly. It's just you look at a guy like Blake Corum that can catch, he can run, he can do just about everything, and it's like getting a guy like that at the end of the second, into the third round is going to be an awesome value for some teams.
So I'll push back a little bit on like he can catch, but I think it's not his strength. Unlike if I go look at a Trey Benson or either the Ray Davis or some of the other guys who have come behind him, and then Jonathan Brooks I think is still the best running back in this class. Yeah. But then I think just going with the Bijan, what separates Bijan is his overall, like you don't really need another running back.
Yes, I agree.
You know what I mean? And so I think with a guy like
Bijan ran wide receiver drills last year at the combine as like for fun, and people were legitimately saying like he would be a top 10 wide receiver in this wide receiver class.
Well, and that's what
you're not saying that about Blake Corum.
No. Well, and that's what with him and Jahmyr Gibbs, like they're putting him in a slot. You know, so you're not gonna do that with Corum here. So I think it's gonna be very interesting on where these two guys go. I think even more interesting is gonna be Spencer Rattler, someone who we have really been grown on, someone who we've known. Not we personally, but I mean us as viewers of college football and football in general. It's weird saying like we've known him now for 4 years. Like he's had a very unique ride, I would say, almost minus the national championships, but like a Jalen Hurts-esque type ride, you know, so to say, which is unique now, I think, to all of us in watching football, just with the new transfer portal deal. So, what are some of the things that you like about Spencer Rattler?
He's really experienced. He, for the most part, takes really good care of the football. He sees defenses really well. He has plus arm strength. He has really good improv in his game. He creates really well. The biggest thing I think with him is just he's 6 foot, 5'11", 6 foot. His arm is good. Like he has a good arm. It's not like a Josh Allen howitzer. Like it's not on that level.
Yeah,
It's not even really close to that. And I think at the NFL, he might just be too small. Like he's just not a big guy. And then I said he takes care of the football most of the time. Sometimes he does have a propensity to just kind of throw the ball up and see what happens. And at the NFL, you can't do that.
yeah. Now,
So
it's going to be interesting to see because I think of all of after those top 6 quarterbacks, so to say, I think he's the one that I would say like next would be the best project, just because he does have the physical intangibles. You know, he is. I would consider him a dual threat quarterback. He can throw it. He has the experience going up against top competition. You know, and I think we have seen his maturity over the past couple of years as well. So I think it'd be very unique for a team in the early 3rd round, especially too if you go look at it. Like I know we've mocked even your Patriots taking him there just as a flyer to develop and like let's see what happens. You know, so especially the Patriots right now haven't figured out what's going to, as of recording this, haven't figured out that quarterback situation just yet. So let's wrap this up here with on this slide at least Junior Colson and Malachi Corley. Junior Colson, linebacker from Michigan. Super big guy. It's going to be interesting to see him run downhill very well. Malachi Corley, that's a guy that you really like coming from Western Kentucky.
Yeah, I mean, if you want yak, this is your guy. Led the nation in yards after catch. Is probably more of a running back, that plays wide receiver than anything. But 6 foot, 210, 215, I think, and just
I'll double check here.
built like a running back. And man, he puts people on the ground like he's a running back. He's so impressive. All of that being said, he doesn't really run a lot of routes. He kind of runs like maybe deep crossers and screen passes. But again, if you're a team that wants to utilize a gadget player, he has good top end speed. He is very elusive in space. He's hard to bring down. This would be a guy that I think that teams like that would really enjoy. He's just not quite the route runner of like a Debo that you want.
Yeah, but to your point, though, if you're looking for a Debo, this is going to be the guy. 5'11", 215, that is what you talked about. You can put him in the backfield, kind of that's that same Debo-esque size. And so, but you're right, Debo has that other level route running capability. He's almost going to be more kind of like you utilize him as a Debo, but then when you pass him the ball, it's going to be in like Tyreek Hill-esque situations. So to say, you don't know where the screen plays or underneath is like where there's going to be an open field. You get from the ball and just let it work.
Yeah. So some team I think is going to get really lucky drafting him here. So let's move on to the final 5 of this 20. This is another guy I'm really high on, Cameron Kitchens. He didn't test super well athletically at the combine, but on tape his athleticism stands out a little bit. But his instincts are what I really like in what he brings to the table. He has great instincts for a safety. He can come in and be a single high safety right away. He can also play cover 2. He can play down in the box. A little bit undersized. So you probably don't want to keep him down in the box for too long. But again, he comes down. He can deliver a punch and just a really solid player.
Yeah, something similar to what we've talked about with safeties as well. Is like they just slowly, we noticed, just kind of started working their way down our boards, and the wrong kind of down. And so I think it's gonna be interesting to see where he falls. I can see him going much earlier than this, maybe early 2nd round. But I think just on the overall prospect level though as well, I think that he's going to be around this late 2nd, early 3rd type range. So Christian Haynes, guard from UConn, really liked him at the Senior Bowl. I think he is kind of separated himself in that kind of 2nd tier of interior offensive linemen behind Jackson Powers Johnson and Zach Frazier from West Virginia. My apologies. So I think he's done really well. I'm going to be very curious to see where they where he ends up falling as well. Once again, similar to Cameron Kitchens, if it wasn't for the receivers or the other offensive tackle, so to say, in this draft, he absolutely could be up higher as well. So wrapping up the top 60 here, Xavier Leggett, receiver from South Carolina, Edgerrin Cooper, linebacker from Texas A&M, and then Jalen Polk, receiver from Washington. Ryan, which of these three guys do you think is going to be taken first?
I would honestly have to lean towards Xavier Leggett, who we have here at third. He's the 6'3", 220 guy that runs the 4.39. Like, that's just, he's height, weight, speed. He runs good routes. He has good hands. He can win off routes. He can win in contested catch situations. But I think when you look at the other two prospects here, I think both of those guys, Edgerrin Cooper, if you need an athletic linebacker that can just about do everything that you ask of him, that Edgerrin Cooper is that exactly. And then Jalen Polk played second fiddle to Rome Odunze, but in the NFL, I think he would be a perfect complementary piece to just about anybody. I saw a comp that I just kind of can't get out of my head, but he's kind of more of a juiced up Jacoby Myers, where he's a little faster. He gets in and out of his breaks a little bit better. He has just as good of hands, because Jacoby Myers has great hands, but just a really, really solid receiver. And some team, if you're looking for that bigger Z receiver that has that explosiveness, I think Jalen Polk is your guy.
Well, and I was thinking as well, so I'll disagree. I think Jalen Polk could be the guy that comes off first, just because I think if you have that big number one type receiver, like, who's going to be a guy? So let's look at Cincinnati, for example. Tyler Boyd might be moving on. T. Higgins just requested a trade after they franchise tagged him. If you're looking for a guy, I think, who can complement Jamar Chase being that offense, I think Jalen Polk could be the guy, because he's more consistent. I think you can know what you're going to go and get from them. Xavier Leggett, I think, can almost develop into being the guy, but at the same time, I can also see him turning into more of a, I don't mean this as a knock against Gabe Davis, but as a guy who is,
I can see that,
your go ball type guy or your run blocking receiver. If that makes sense. A great locker room guy, but if you're looking for that consistent production, I could see him being kind of boom or bust coming every Sunday. Well, Jalen Polk might be that more consistent. He's going to get you 50 to 70 yards.
I agree. I do think it will depend on what teams need. Like, if you need the bigger outside receiver, so like I will say, like, for a team like New England that's picking at 68, if they want to move up and get an Xavier Leggett, I think that would work, especially if they go and they get a Hollywood Brown, Calvin Ridley, or a Tyler Boyd specifically, that's going to be more of that nuanced route runner.
Yeah.
I think that would be an interesting mix there, just to kind of see. So that is it for the second group of 20 that we're doing here. So if you're still with us before we go on, please go ahead and like and subscribe. Leave a comment down below on what you think of our rankings so far. Do you love it? Do you hate it? What players do you think are astronomically out of place? And let's kind of keep going here with pick 60 through 56. Starting off here, I'll say his name because if you're a fan of the channel, you know Tyler struggles with pronunciations, but it's Karan Emegdije, the tackle from Yale. A little bit of a swing tackle, played both sides of the ball. Technically, very, very sound. It's very funny watching him on tape, because he's an NFL caliber tackle, and he's playing against not NFL caliber players. And he just big brothers them all the time. It just play in and play out, and that's a fitting reference for this channel. But it is just kind of hilarious. He just ragdolls some of these edge rushers, and it's really funny to watch.
Yeah, I don't know how many Ivy League edge rushers there are in the NFL.
Very few, if none at all.
Very few, if none at all, especially going up against Karen here, who just kind of absolutely demolish him. I know that's not his name, but that's just kind of how I pronounce it. Is it Karan? No, it's not Karan.
Karan Emegdije.
Is it really Karan?
Yeah, that's the pronunciation I heard. Karan Emegdije.
I love it. That's awesome.
Yeah.
No, he's going to be great. Similar to, I would say, who was the tackle that the guard, Christian Haynes as well, who was just a couple picks back. There's going to be a team that gets a good offensive lineman here towards the end of the second round, maybe even mid-second round, depending on where they put him. So Adesa Isaac, another one of those guys, had a great college career, just happened to be across from somebody else who's maybe getting a little bit more notoriety in Chop Robinson. But edge rusher out of Penn State, really like him here. He's the guy, too, that we noticed as well is outside of Braylon Trice. So he's kind of that last of, I think, round 2 edge rushers. There's about 7 or 8
I would
edge
say day
rushers.
2, honestly, like of true edge rushers.
Well, you have Braylon Trice, who we mentioned, and Gabriel Murphy, but Gabriel Murphy
Yeah.
barely made a top 100. If I'm looking at like round 2 or better edge rushers, he's the last of those guys who I think could be going in the second round. And that's where I make that point too, because there's a huge drop off from the edge rusher position from Dallas Turner to Idesa Isaac. Then from there, it's kind of few pickings. I would say. So that's where I even look at a team like the Falcons here, as well as like I look at that number 8 overall pick. It's like, what are they going to do with that pick? Because if a top talent receiver falls to them, that's great, but they might not go get an edge rusher, just because they all might be taken off the board because teams are like, we want an edge rusher now, and we'll go get receivers later. So that's where it's going to be interesting on how teams are who need edge rushers, how they play it. Do they go take them early in the first round, or do they wait and hope that their guy's there? And if not, maybe they don't even get an edge rusher till late day 3. So moving on though to 58th player, Rook Aurora, defensive tackle from Clemson. I almost said Cleveland there, but solid defensive tackle. I think he is now. We're starting to get into those elite interior defensive linemen that we're going to see here be taken in the first 2 rounds.
Yeah, he is one of the best interior pass rushers in this class. I really think you look and what he was able to do at Clemson, they definitely schemed up some pressures for him, but he just beat a lot of really talented offensive linemen, and he brings a lot to the NFL level. He has good physicality. He's good against the run also, so he's not solely a pass rush, like kind of sub-package defensive tackle type, and I really like what he brings to the table here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wrap up this set of 5. Jermaine Burton, receiver from Alabama, and defense tackle Chris Jenkins as well. Jermaine Burton, I think, is just going to be a solid receiver. I think him and Brendan Rice, I think, are kind of in that same boat for me, where it's like I think you just know what you're going to get. They're going to be solid. I think they're going to be a great receiver 3 or a good receiver 2 on a team and help take some pressure off of whichever team's receiver 1. And so, Chris, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I've heard a little bit about Jermaine Burton, and as a player, I definitely think this is kind of where he falls, like right in the middle of this wide receiver group in the top 100. I will say I've heard some concerns about his personality and how he fits into a locker room. And so that we'll see like where he actually falls. Yeah. On tape, he looks really solid. And he just, again, doesn't wow you with any of his traits, but he just does a lot of things really well. And then Chris Jenkins, going to be a little bit more of a run stuffing defensive tackle, but still has the athleticism to get after the passer in passing situations. And so I like what he brings to the table. And if you need just a stout defensive lineman, he's at the top of the list in this year's class.
Absolutely. No, I agree with that. So let's move on now to 55 through 51 here, starting with Javon Bullard, safety from Georgia. I mean, a Georgia defensive guy. It's kind of hard to go against them, I would say. So he had a good career at Georgia. Looking forward to seeing him. I could absolutely see the Eagles taking him. All joking aside, I'd say that they would need it, especially to releasing Kevin Baird and everything. So I think he's just going to be a solid guy. Moving on now to Xavier Worthy. Obviously, he's probably the most popular player from the NFL Combine with his speed and everything. We talked a lot about how much or where we want to put Xavier Worthy. And just because he had all the speed and everything doesn't mean that now all of a sudden he's a top 10 prospect. And so we've seen a lot of guys come in who break speedy records, but then it just doesn't translate onto the football field, or they just don't fit well into the system. I could see him going as early as like late first round, but I can also see him then going towards the end of the second round as well. It's going to be curious to see how teams utilize him or see him and how they'd want to utilize the speed.
Yeah, and that was one of the things. We're big fans of PFF here, and I was listening to a podcast. They were talking about how you really shouldn't count traits twice, because I think if you look at what the Patriots did with Tyquan Thornton, who was the last receiver to really run in the 4.2s, and he was an early day 3 pick, probably like mid fourth round guy, and then they drafted him in the middle of the second round at pick 50, and like that pick just really hasn't worked out for them. And really, like the only thing that changed from the end of the season to the draft was just the fact that he ran the 4.28 at the combine, and they counted his speed twice, right? Like they looked at his tape and then counted his speed. Where like if you watch the tape, you see that he's fast, but not quite at like Tyreek Hill level. With Xavier Worthy, he is that fast. But I would say the big separator here, he has the twitch and the like cuts and the breaks that you want wide receivers to be able to actually separate from guys instead of just like straight up running away from them. He has a nasty whip route. I believe it was against Iowa State that he just absolutely toasts a corner on the goal line. And he runs good routes. He has some inconsistencies here and there, especially with like catching the ball, which I think would be ironic if he goes to Kansas City. But yeah, and then next up on the board, another wide receiver, Keon Coleman. This guy played college basketball for Tom Izzo at Michigan State. He's going to be the 6'5", 215. Didn't run super great in the 40, but everyone was talking about how he reached 20 miles an hour in the gauntlet drill, which was impressive, but just a really good athlete and super fluid. He doesn't quite have the separation statistics that you would want from a guy being taken this high, but you're hoping you can develop him because he is newer to football and not quite as experienced.
Yeah. He's going to be I'm very curious to see where he goes because I'm not as high on him because he's super athletic and I think he's just a super raw talent. I think if I'm not as high on him being drafted in the first round, but not that I'm saying that he won't make it in the NFL as a receiver. I'm curious to see who's going to take that chance on him. Like I think a team like Baltimore would be like he's something totally opposite to what they have now. But he does have that speed and just overall freakish athletic capability that would fit that system. But he's tall. He's that deep threat kind of guy compared to unlike some of the other guys like Zay Flowers, so to say, who they drafted last year. Who's going to be that? He's their number one receiver. He's going to be that shifty kind of do-it-all type receiver. But he's mainly going to be used underneath. And so very curious to kind of see where he ends up going here. And then we have Jonathan Brooks, number one running back, coming off the board at number 52. If it wasn't for the ACL injury, I think he could potentially even be pushing the first round. I think he would, at minimum, would be early second round here, and he could still go there to some teams here. I just think he's not like Bijan, but he's kind of in between Bijan and Roschon Johnson, I would say. And I think any team would love to have him here. And with modern medicine now with ACLs, I don't think that's going to affect his draft stock too much. I still think he's probably going to be taken in the middle of the second round.
Yeah, and he tore his ACL in Thanksgiving, like around Thanksgiving, right?
It was early-ish November. It might have been Thanksgiving, but it was around that time.
But I mean, you're looking at a 6 to 8 month recovery, which would kind of put him back right at the beginning of the season. So maybe he starts the season on the PUP list and then comes back in late September, early October. So I don't think that would
even be PUP list, to be honest.
Yeah, and so like I think his talent, if he didn't tear his ACL, he would be back on the field, or he would be up near the first round. So if he didn't tear his ACL, he'd be back on the field really quickly. No, he would be up probably near the first round. So closing out the second 50, I don't know, the first 50 that we're doing, but it's not the top 50. Yeah. So Roman Wilson had a fantastic Senior Bowl, 6'1", 190, gonna be just an absolute menace in that Z receiver role. He's a true separator. He runs really good routes. That was one thing I think Michigan's offense was, I don't want to say simplified because they ran a lot of pro concepts, but like the routes that they ran, they didn't really run like a pro route tree. They just kind of ran a lot of like crossers and go balls and some misdirection stuff. And Roman Wilson really got to show his route running prowess at the Senior Bowl, where they did run a few like some more complicated schemes there. And I think that he showed he's a true second round talent. I could see him going all the way as high as like 33 to the Panthers, who really need a guy like with his skill set.
Yeah. Yeah, heck, 32. I would say why not there
Yeah,
to the
exactly.
Chiefs. But I think it's one of these suits. I was thinking about it. We put him ahead of Xavier Worthy and Keon Coleman, and I just think he's more consistent. I think he's going to provide more consistency to a team. Keon Coleman and Xavier Worthy, I think, can provide those 150-yard receiving games. I think they can also provide some like 20-yard receiving games. So I think Roman Wilson is going to fit
Yeah.
right there in the middle. Could provide a lot of pretty consistent 65 to 85 receiving yard type games and take a lot of good pressure off of your number one receiver. And that's what I think what I saw from him in the Alabama games and then also in the national championship as well was he was just a guy that J.J. McCarthy on offense could lean on. He was just that Mr. Consistent. So
Yeah.
Let's move on now to the bottom 50 here, starting off with Darius Robinson, edge rusher from Mizzou. This is a guy, he's huge, isn't he?
Yeah, he's like 6'3", 300, but he moves like Braylon Trice at that size, and he had a really solid Senior Bowl. I will say his tape isn't as good, but what you're hoping is he's just wasn't quite a scheme fit for Missouri because he did show out at the Senior Bowl and he had a really solid week at the Senior Bowl, and he just if you get him in the right scheme, he reminds me a little bit of Keon White. From last year's draft, you get him in the right scheme, and he could really explode at the next level.
Yeah, but what I'm curious about is 6'5", 285, 34.5-inch arms. Super huge. He did bench press 21 reps. 4.95, 40 with a 173 10-yard split. And
that's
so
a good split.
That's a good split. And so I think that with that size, I think he's just going to be bull rushing a lot of guys. So it'd be something similar, like if you want to put him across from like a T.J. Watt, so to say. I'm just throwing out names, and so
I think of Lucas Van Ness with the Packers. They run that 3-4 with like the outside linebackers where they have the speedy guy, so they run stunts, and then Lucas Van Ness is now the crasher on the guard to create the space. Like that's the role I think he would be really good in.
Yeah,
so,
I like it.
So yeah, and then next up, Jordan Morgan, the offensive lineman from Arizona, measured in with 32.5-inch arms at the combine, which I know it's going to sound so stupid, but that half an inch apparently means a lot because there are no starting offensive tackles in the NFL with arms less than 33 inches. And I know what you're saying. Oh, it can't make that big of a difference. Peter Skoronski is one of the best offensive linemen technically that we've probably ever evaluated in last year's class. And even he didn't make it at left tackle, and the Titans kicked him into guard when they were desperate for a left tackle. And so that to me, I think says a lot just about how important that measurement is. And Jordan Morgan is going to probably have to kick into the interior at the next level. And that's why we have him down here at 49.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's going to be interesting. It's just funny how it is. It's just how precise it is. It's like every player is going to be different. Every player is going to be evaluated differently. But then there's still those trends be like, nope, that's just the cutoff. That's just the cutoff right there. So wrapping out this set of five here, Kamari Lassiter, Devondre Sweat, and then Ricky Pearsall. Three very unique players, I think, at three totally different positions. Kamari Lassiter has been falling down the boards. I would say even if you go back to mock drafts during the season, Kamari Lassiter was probably considered a first-round pick. But I think he has just slowly started to fall off. There just seems to be a separation between him and then like those top five corners, I would say, like from the Quinton Mitchell to like the Kool-Aid McKinstry. That being said, though, I still think that you're getting a solid player who, at minimum, you can develop. But so I think he can come in and probably start for a secondary needy team for anybody. So I think there's a lot of good tape on there. There's still some development, obviously, but I think Kamari Lassiter is going to be very good. Devondre Sweat, probably the most unique, I think, prospect in this entire class, I would say. I wanted to have it up here, but he's 366 pounds and ran a 5.2 40, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. Which I think was just 2.10, 5.27 40, which I think was just 2.10 slower than the fastest of the defensive tackles. I would curl up in a ball and cry if this man was running out, just because of how big he is and how explosive he is. He's going to be extremely unique because typically with nose tackles, you like very special situations. I could see him being a 3-down type guy. He might want to lose a couple LBs, just so he can be on the field more. But with somebody with that size, even if he's not the best run blocker, just his overall size is going to make it tough, I think, for defenses to run against him and for interior offensive linemen to create holes and move him out of the way. I look at a team with like where he's at right now, potentially even if the Chargers would want to take him early and really beef up that defensive interior. We'll have to see what happens with Nick Bosa and Khalil Mack. Supposedly they potentially could be on the trade block as well. So we'll just have to see. But a guy like DeMondre Sweat, I think everybody would want a guy like him. But he is kind of, I feel, more situation limited than he would like to be just because of his overall size. But I think if he may be able to lose a couple LBs, that it will be he could be on the field a little bit more.
Yeah, definitely. And you definitely see his athleticism for somebody his size show up on tape. So it's going to be really interesting to see where he ends up. I would love to see him be able to play like a traditional nose tackle, like right over a center. I just would love to see that matchup, like a Vince Wilfork just right in the middle of the defense. So wrapping up here, the first 5 in the top 50. Ricky Pearsall, the wide receiver from Florida. One, he has the best college catch I think I've ever seen. I don't know if you've seen the one over the middle. It's like against like Western Michigan or something, but he just reaches up from the bottom and just snags the ball one-handed.
Yeah.
But there's more to his game than just highlight reel catches. He's a fantastic route runner. He has really good speed. I believe he ran a low 4.4s and just really good size, 6'1", 195. Just going to be a problem, I think, at the next level. Going to play in that Z receiver role, most likely. He can win on the outside, but he's going to be moved around the formation a lot. And I like him in a lot of different schemes. I think he's pretty scheme averse and is just going to be a really, really solid football player for the next 10 years.
Yep, 6'1", 189, ran a 4.4, 140, and super athletic, I would say, just all around on his combine results here. So he's going to be a guy similar. He's in between Jalen Polk in my mind and Ladd McConkey. I think it's just going to be guys, I think, just super reliable. I think all 32 teams would want to draft a guy like this, put him in the offense if he's a slot receiver. He's going to be able to take a lot of pressure off, open up the field, but I think he can also work on that the outside as well. So let's move on now to 45 through 41, wrap up this 60 to 41 range here. So going with Enos Rakestraw, cornerback from Mizzou. He's slowly fallen down our boards. He had a great SEC season. I think played in only 9 games, but I think only allowed like 173 something receiving yards against him, which
no touchdowns either.
No touchdowns, not all against SEC teams, but still, I would say for an SEC corner, that's huge. Similar to Kamari Lassiter, I think you're going to get a guy that can come in and help out immediately, but there's just a difference. Just those top 5 corners, I think, are just a little bit better, So, but I think coming right here, I think he'd be a great day 2 corner. So, moving on to Patrick Paul here, offensive tackle from Houston. This is a guy that you really like. From I guess Big 12 now.
Yeah, the Houston. And I just like his size, and he's very athletic, 6'7", 330, like 36.5-inch arms. So definitely has the length to play on the outside. And he just handles power really well. The one thing I would like to see him do is he has this like tendency to kind of like hug block where he's trying to like sandwich shoulder pads, but just keep his hands in the middle and really try to keep edge rushers off of him, because he does have a tendency to let guys get into his chest. But honestly, his feet look good. That's the only gripe I really have with his game. And if you can fix that issue, which usually you can, I like his ability to potentially come in and be a starter at left tackle for a team day one. And I think this tackle class in this top 50, we're really going to kind of get into some guys that are going to be just really solid players, even outside of like the top 2 guys that we always talk about.
Yeah. So let's wrap this section up here of this middle 20 with edge rushers here. And I'd love to hear a little debate on which of these edge rushers you think will go first. But Jonah Ellis, Chop Robinson, Chris Braswell. I think I went with Chris Braswell as the best of these edge rushers here because I think he's going to be a little bit more consistent. I think overall he's just the more polished edge rusher as of right now. Chop Robinson, above Jonah Ellis to me is just because of that overall explosive athletic capability.
The ceiling for him is
that
really
ceiling
high.
is going to be ridiculous. I think Jonah Ellis is maybe just a little bit like a Chris Braswell light, and so
Yeah.
I think all these guys are really solid. I think all these guys are going to provide unique. I'd say unique benefits to any team's defense. I'd be curious to kind of hear your thoughts on this order and also then the viewers' thoughts as well. So leave a comment down below.
Yeah. Jonah Ellis, I like. He is going to be more of a pass rush specialist. He's 6'2", 245. So you're not going to want to have him on the field in a lot of like true running situations. But on those third downs, you're going to bring him in, and he has a lot of really good pass rush moves. Whereas Chop Robinson, a little bit bigger, more explosive, but just doesn't have the developed pass rush moves that you want. And then also his play against some of the bigger, like top tier talent, it is a little concerning to see. He just kind of gets swallowed up and disappears. And then Chris Braswell, you kind of mentioned it, kind of the in between of both of these guys. Like he has the developed pass rush moves. He's not quite as explosive as Chop Robinson, but he's going to be your probably 3 down edge rusher. And I think NFL teams. He reminds me a little bit of Infernie Jennings from Alabama as well, but he was a 3rd round pick due to some injuries. But just a really solid edge setter. He has pass rush moves to get after the passer, while that's not his strong suit. But just a true 3 down defensive end where he can really be on the field at all times.
Yeah.
So,
so it's going to be fascinating to see. It's just going to be which teams do, which teams like these guys more. And it's going to fit their system. So that's going to wrap it up for the 60-41. If you're still with us here, be sure to like, subscribe, ring the bell, get notified when new videos come out. And so, as I mentioned, 3-round mock drafts coming up here next week, just as a reminder. And so let's move on, though, now to the 40-21 section here, starting off with Braden Fisk, guy who I think exploded up draft boards after the Senior Bowl. I think probably the only guy that benefited more from the Senior Bowl was maybe Jackson Powers Johnson. I think Braden Fisk, I think it's really worked his way up here coming from Florida State. What are some of the things that you like about Braden Fisk?
Explosive. He is so explosive at his size. He can play against the run really well. I think of kind of the pass rushing defensive tackles here, he is the best against the run. And he's not going to be Byron Murphy or a Jerson Newton against the run, but he can definitely hold his own in one-on-one matchups. And I think somebody is going to get a gem here in Braden Fisk. His biggest knock is just he doesn't quite have the arm length that you want. Like if you watch him and Byron Murphy go through that drill at the combine where they're slapping the dummies over, you can just see how long and clubbing Byron Murphy's arms are compared to Braden Fisk's. And it's just if he's able to overcome that, he's going to be in the league for the next 10, 12 years and be a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. It's especially in two, and we're seeing this now with Christian Wilkins going to the Las Vegas Raiders. And if you can go get a big defensive tackle that can just terrorize the defensive interior, it's going to take a bunch of pressure off of the edge rushers. And then if you can pair him up then with already a dominant edge rusher, it's that defensive line is going to be tough to beat on any given Sunday. So let's move on now to a couple of corners here. Mike Sandstro from Michigan and also TJ Tampa from Iowa State. Both these guys, I think, are very unique and I think just solid cornerbacks. I think just overall solid. They're not going to do anything greater than those top 5 corners, I would say, that we're going to get to here in a second. But they're just going to be consistent here. I think they could potentially go in at the back end of the first round. It's just going to depend on where they're at on some of these teams' boards. But I think in general, though, I think you kind of put them in that Kamari Lassiter and then also that
Enos Rakestraw.
Enos Rakestraw range.
Yeah, and start off with Sanders still. I think he's going to make his money being very versatile. He can kind of play inside, play outside. I will say at the NFL, he probably will become a safety. Just he has a really good vision for zone, and it reminds me a lot of Dax Hill from Michigan a few years ago. He just kind of played a little bit of everywhere, and that to me is where Sanders still will make his money. And Tampa, He's going to be 6'2", 200, so he's going to be that outside corner. But if that doesn't work out, I think he would make a great kind of strong safety, put on a few LBs and make him a strong safety. Because, again, he also has a good feel for the game and a good view of zone coverages. And he can hit, man. Like watching him for a corner, he is not shy to go stick his shoulder into some running backs or wide receivers coming across the field. So I like both of these guys. They both do really well in multiple different schemes. I will say Tampa maybe a little bit more man, Sandersville maybe a little bit more zone. So just kind of whatever your flavor is there. Next up is a guy that I feel like has been flying up draft boards, Peyton Wilson, the linebacker from NC State. I mean, he's 6'4", 238, ran a 4.4, and like comes downhill really well. He's exceptional in coverage. Not a whole lot more you really want from a linebacker.
Yeah. Well, he's kind of that perfect size, I think, of what I was saying earlier about some of these other linebackers who are just a little bit. They're like the traditional type linebacker, maybe like a little bit beefier, so to say. But with his overall size and then with his speed to come along with it, in today's NFL, there's a lot of 11 personnel, so there's going to be three wide receivers out there, a tight end. Most of the time, that tight end can go out and catch the ball, and then a speedy running back in the backfield. So you're going to have more secondary in the backfield than linebackers, like a traditional 4-3, for example. A lot of teams are going to be doing nickel. So you need to have that linebacker who can run sideline to sideline as quick as possible, just as quick as some of these running backs.
Yeah.
And so that's why I think he's flying up these boards, because guys like that are invaluable. So I think he can sneak into the first round. I'm looking at a team like Dallas, for example, who has taken a couple of hits from guys leaving to follow Dan Quinn to Washington. I think they need a little bit of help on the linebacker. Not a little bit. I would say some decent help on the linebacker position. So I think a guy like Peyton Wilson, I think would fit in perfectly. I think to that setup. Then you pair him too on the opposite side of Micah Parsons if you want to have a blitz. Those are just two fast guys that are going to be coming at the quarterback from different angles. So it's going to be interesting to see where he ends up falling, just with kind of how linebackers are viewed. Lastly on this slide, though, Michael Penix. He is, who knows where these second three quarterbacks are going to go. Most likely, the top three quarterbacks, Williams, May, Daniels, are probably going to go 1, 2, 3. At minimum, they're going to be taken in the top 10. Who knows, though, where Penix, Bo Nix, and then J.J. McCarthy are going to end up falling. Penix here at 36, I think what helped him, at least in my eyes, was his clean bill of health. I think getting medically cleared, he looked the most poised, I would say, during the combine. It makes sense. He's one of the older guys that is out there. He's had a lot of experience. So I as an IU fan, would love to see him do well. And so I'm curious to see where he's going to be. He could end up sneaking into the end of the first round here, maybe even earlier on, depending on what happens with this kind of quarterback carousel that's happening.
Yeah, I mean, these second three quarterbacks, J.J. McCarthy, I guess, has kind of pushed his way up by around the top 10. But Nix and Penix, the reason why I had Penix this low is just because of his injury history. And I will say, of all the quarterbacks, I feel like he reads the middle of the field probably the worst, just in the sense of he has a lot of arm strength. In terms of arm talent, he has that fastball. He struggles to throw with touch. So getting the ball over linebackers, he kind of struggles with for that intermediate passing. And then also Washington, this is credit to them, but they did a really good job of making his reads very simple. They ran that spread offense. It's kind of hard to disguise stuff against a spread offense, because if you disguise things too much, then you're just out of position. And you got guys running open all over the field. So he, to me, has the hardest translation of anybody to the NFL. But I definitely think he has the skill sets and the mentality to go in and be successful. So I really like him, and I think teams are going to be really happy with him here at the beginning of the second round, most likely. So let's get into 35 through 31 here. Starting off, Kool-Aid McKinstry. We talked a little bit earlier about his positional flexibility here. I do think he probably is best in a zone scheme. He can play man coverage, and he can play man coverage at a high level. But I think when you really see him thrive is when he's able to drop off into a zone and just kind of read what's going on in the play, and then drive on the ball or a receiver from there. And just a really talented guy, one of the highest rated Alabama corners ever. I saw a thing the other day, and it was like he's the fourth highest rated Alabama corner ever. The other ones were Marlon Humphrey, not Marshawn Lattimore. Oh crap, I forget. But it was three like perennial Pro Bowl corners from Alabama.
Yeah. And Terry Arnold. And so, he's solid. I think one of the things that fell him down a little bit on our board, wasn't able to test at the combine.
Yeah.
And there's also just some other players that have just worked their way up here. Like, for example, we'll get to him here in a second, but like Kingsley Suamatea and Zach Frazier as well. So I could definitely still see Kool-Aid McKinstry being a first-round corner. I think he's probably slipping a little bit. I do believe he's going to go in front of that Mike Sandstorm, TJ Tampa, Enos Rakestraw group. But I think he's at the bottom end of that first tier level of corners. And so, moving on though to Amarius Mims, we went back and forth on this because I guess Amarius Mims is just a freak human being. He is so huge and so athletic. But then at the same time, though, too, there is a concern just overall on just his overall experience. He's only had 8 starts as well. But you just go look at it on paper, he looks like a future Hall of Famer left tackle for any team.
Yeah, and so similar to Troy Franklin, I'm not really as high on Amarius Mims. He's very raw technically. Broderick Jones, we would joke, I really liked Broderick Jones last year, and I was like, he's just a raw Trent Williams, like with his athleticism. And Amarius Mims is not even close to as developed as Broderick Jones was. And I think you couple that, Amarius Mims has some significant injury history in the sense of he has been active and technically a starter on Georgia's roster for the last 2 seasons, but he's only played 8 games because he can't really stay healthy. And then he actually even got hurt at the combine. So just a few like areas of concern there for me, and there's just other tackles that I kind of prefer over him. Speaking of tackles that I like a lot, a little bit more than Amarius Mims, Kingsley Suamatea played both tackle spots. He's a great athlete, not as freakishly big as Amarius Mims, but still freaking huge, like 6'6", 325, I believe. He moves really, really well, and just all the talent in the world to be a Pro Bowl caliber tackle at the next level.
Yeah. And so it's one we're just starting now to get into some of those guys whose size, like they're just freak human beings. You know, and so if you're looking for a right tackle, a lot of these guys, I think you can maybe not plug and play, but if you look at the overall projection and their ceiling, it's absolutely, I think, worth the risk here, taking it at a late first round, early second round. So, like Zach Frazier here, he's been working his way up, very similar to Jackson Powers Johnson, but I think one of the top linemen in the class overall. But I think getting him here at a center, I'm looking at a team potentially I was just said Ravens, but they have Tyler Linderbaum. But the Panthers traded Brian Burns, so they now have the 33rd and 39th overall pick. If they're wanting to reset on the center line or on anywhere in the interior offensive line, I think Zach Frazier would be a perfect pick at one of those 2 spots here.
They did also go out and get Rob Hunt today. So
no. And it doesn't say, depending on how the free agency works out. I'm just talking about Zach Frazier is that talent as well. We have him higher up here. This is one of the few times where I think potentially we have him at 32nd, which is the last pick of the first round. I could see him falling to maybe like in the 40s just because of overall positional need.
Positional value.
Teams. Yeah. So another guy I could see falling here, but also I could see being taken well earlier than 31st overall is Bo Nix. Similar to Michael Penix, who knows where he's going to fall here. I think with the quarterback carousel that we'll see over kind of this free agency period over these next couple of months, that I think going to really determine on where teams see Bo Nix and Michael Penix. If a team is desperate for a quarterback, they'll probably take a shot on him or JJ McCarthy or Michael Penix. So I think with Bo Nix, I think we kind of know what we're going to get. He's obviously going to improve when he comes to the team, but it's not even like Michael Penix or with JJ McCarthy, where there is still some sort of mystery, like how is he going to translate over to the NFL, especially like JJ McCarthy. I think he's a big mystery. Bo Nix, we've seen so much of him, and we know he can be consistent, but that Oregon offense, I think, kind of reminded me of the Broncos offense with Russell Wilson. So that's why I almost wonder maybe Bo Nix kind of might go in there. A lot of dink and dunk, or there was a deep ball. So
Yeah,
I'm curious to kind of see how he overall develops and who ends up taking him here. I mean, I could honestly see Denver taking him at 12. I think he would fit in well with what they're trying to do. But what is Denver trying to do? What's the direction of Denver? So
I think they're rebuilding. That's the direction.
Trading off Jerry Jeudy, I would say so.
The thing I like about Bo Nix is I feel like he's always making the right decision, and I don't know what he's being coached. I don't really know this like the scheme of Oregon. He just protects the football really well. He's quick. He gets the ball out of his hands quickly. He's a plus athlete. I think he has plus arm strength that he showed off at the combine. He makes great decisions, and yeah, like people always make fun of him because he's the check down king. I'm like, well, one, that's not always a bad thing, and two, like Oregon's offense is very much around the line of scrimmage or down the field, and he showed when they throw the ball down the field, he has the arm strength to drive it and the accuracy to place footballs kind of over defenders. So I like Bo Nix. I think he's going to be really good value here. Let's move on to our top 30. And this is where JJ McCarthy is. So, again, also maybe a guy that I'm probably lower on, I think, than you are. And I like JJ McCarthy. I think the tools are there. You just have to assemble them. And what I mean by that is he has shown at times that he can do all the things you want a quarterback to do. He just doesn't do them all the time. And especially like once you start getting 10 to 15 yards down the field and he has to throw the ball outside the numbers or like throw it over a safety in the middle of the field, that's where I think he really does struggle with just accuracy. I think he has the processing and whatnot. And I think part of it too is he might just not fully believe in himself yet. But all in all, I think the pieces are there. He's a good athlete. He has a good arm. Just a really solid quarterback prospect.
So I'll push back on that. And of course, my example is one throw. But the touchdown pass that he had to Roman Wilson in that Ohio State game was exactly what you're talking about, where it was over the safety, kind of a tight.
Are you talking about the one where like the safety doesn't turn around?
Something like that, but it's still a tight.
I'm talking about like deep plays. That was a 25-yard pass over the middle of the field. He ripped it in there. He didn't have to throw it over anybody. Is more what I'm talking about. That's where he struggles.
He threw it over a couple of guys. But I get what you're saying, and I guess it's kind of one of the things with the mystery of JJ McCarthy, where if it's like if I'm Denver, for example, and if you are going through a rebuild, I'd rather take my shot on JJ McCarthy, or shoot if you're Minnesota and you don't trade up, and you already got like a quarterback guru and Kevin O'Connell, be like I'll go with JJ McCarthy here over Bo Nix. I think there's an interesting intrigue with him. And I say that, though, I think Minnesota, in this example, Michael Penix might be a better fit for that style of offense. But that's neither here nor there. So it's going to be – that's what I'm saying. They can go 12th. They can go 50th. Like, I don't know where they're going to end up falling.
My thing is, it's the classic, like, hey, do you want $100 or do you want to spin this wheel where you could win nothing or you could win the lottery? Like, it's –
well, that's the entire with drafted quarter. I mean, go look at Zach.
Well, no.
Trey
but
Lance,
you know
Justin
what you're
Fields.
getting in Bo Nix. Like, you're going to get the consistent game manager who.
Yeah,
like,
but inflation's crazy, man. $100 won't get you that far.
Exactly. I'm all for taking the risk on the quarterbacks, but yeah, until it comes to my team, and then they actually have to make the pick at 3, and it's like
in this analogy, and I am notoriously good at picking good football teams to root for, like the Falcons and the Indiana Hoosiers. I'm going to spin the wheel and take my chance.
Yeah, no, I agree.
And so who knows? You're going to come into a situation like if we're sticking with Denver or with well, it's really Denver, Minnesota now because the Patriots, if you guys wanted a quarterback, you can get him at number 3. It's those two teams. I would say I would rather take McCarthy or Penix. Well, Penix, I think specifically for Minnesota, just with the style of that offense.
Yeah.
McCarthy, I think, could translate to both. Bo Nix, I think I think he would do okay. But that's where I think the reason why Penix is a little bit lower, and I'm not realizing this, is just because of how the injury history. I think he's more specific to certain offenses like Minnesota. I think JJ McCarthy is going to be the best option of all of them in both those offenses. While Bo Nix would be like, if we need an Aiden O'Connell-esque, be like, okay, with Bo Nix here,
Yeah.
So
I think they're very different. If you need a starter right now, maybe Bo Nix is your guy. If you have the time to develop a guy, then I think maybe you go the JJ McCarthy route. So
yeah.
Another guy here, Jatavian Sanders from Texas, the very athletic tight end. Didn't really show up at the combine testing, but when you go and turn on the film, he is that athlete that you want him to be, and he does show the willingness to block. And I think a team like Miami, who wants that athletic tight end that can still stay on the field in running situations, I think this is like a perfect fit for them.
Yeah, I'd be curious though with them getting Jonnu Smith. I'd be curious.
That is true.
He's one of the few. That's one of the few teams where I could see him taken in the first round. I could see a team honestly like the Chargers in the early second round going with Jatavian Sanders here. But yeah, in the combine, like he ran a 4.69, which like I guess technically a little bit slower in the relative to the other tight ends. That being said, though, too, you can make an argument that he's a better blocker than Brock Bowers. You can make an argument that he might even be a little bit of a better. I won't say pass catcher, but he's very close. Like he's very close. I think a pass catcher. That's why I think not to take away. Like Jatavian Sanders is a stud. Whoever gets him is going to get a top tight end in the league. He's going to be starting day one. So that's why I think a team like the Chargers, I could absolutely see him. I think they would gladly take him at 36 or 37. And so, at 28, Tyler Guyton here. This is a guy, just an overall freak athlete. Overall, plug and play, right tackle, boom, like there you go.
Yeah, or honestly, left tackle.
He could do left tackle as well. Yeah.
He's a former tight end. He has the length, athleticism, and size that you want in a left tackle. And right now, I think he's still raw enough. You could probably make that switch fairly seamlessly.
Yeah. So 27, A.D. Mitchell as well. I was just not thinking about it. It's like, why is A.D. Mitchell so much higher than Xavier Worthy? And I think it's something similar as well to like obviously Xavier Worthy had the 4.2 140. But I think A.D. Mitchell's more versatile to an offense. I think he can fit into more types of offenses. He's a little bit more of a polished route runner, more consistent overall in pass catching. A little bit bigger. I think he can play slot. I think he can play outside. I'm thinking of a team like Houston who, man, you just put him with Tank Dell, Nico Collins. Like, I think he would just be an absolute stud coming in. So great career at Texas. What are your overall thoughts on A.D. Mitchell?
Yeah, just a really solid all-around receiver. It's kind of crazy to think about. Like, we have hit the point where all of the receivers in last year's class are below the guys that we are starting to talk about. And A.D. Mitchell does everything, I think, well. There's not one part of his game that I really point to. He uses his size really well in jump ball situations. We saw that against Washington. He usually guys his size at I think 6'3", 6'4", are
6'2", 205.
So, okay, even 6'2", but bigger. So bigger wide receivers sometimes struggle to get off press man, and that's something that I think even he does really well. Is get off man coverage. He has the elusiveness and the speed to beat defensive backs off the line. Like just anything that you want a receiver to do, he can do it, and that's why he's that much higher above Xavier Worthy.
Yeah, he does need to get a little bit quicker. He only ran a 4.34 40 at 205 pounds. So I mean, that might be a knock on him. I'm obviously joking if you're typing this. So let's wrap up this section here of these 5 players. Tyler Nubin, safety for Minnesota. He has been working his way up the boards. It's funny. One of the things, kind of the consistent themes of is like the overall value of players, of positions kind of pushes players down. Guy like Tyler Newman, though, I mean, he's really been working his way up the draft boards, had a great combine overall. And so I think he might not be a first-round pick, but if we're looking at, he's the best safety in this class.
Yeah, for sure. And when you look at what he can do, he really is somewhat scheme averse on the defensive side of the ball, because he can play single high, he can play a 2 high. He could honestly even really be a slot corner, or play like over a tight end or something if you really need him to. And just a really solid defensive back here. Because I don't want to pigeonhole him into being a safety per se. So
he probably will be a safety.
No. He is a safety, but like he's going to play in a lot of different coverage situations where he's not going to be a safety all the time per se.
Gotcha. So, I see what you're saying. Yeah. So let's wrap up the final 5 here of the second to last of the kind of 20 sections that we're doing here with Ladd McConkey, receiver from UGA. I really like this guy just because very similar to like a Ricky Pearsall or Jalen Polk. He's just better than both those guys. His route running capabilities is going to be phenomenal. All 32 teams, I think, would want a guy like this in the receiver room, just with how good he is as a route runner, creating his own separation. Any quarterback can just lean on this guy. And I'm even looking to how well CJ Stroud did with Tank Dell. Like, I think Ladd McConkey is even better than Tank Dell. Yeah. And so every quarterback's going to be like, I want this guy. I want this guy. You know, we're going to have our number 1 receiver. That's great. I want this guy right in the slot. So if I know it's 3rd and 4 and I see the perfect zone for just a quick little 4-yard slant to Ladd McConkey, I'm like, boom, I'm calling that hot route right there. And I think Ladd McConkey is going to be able to do that. He can probably one of the best route runners, I think, in this class.
Yeah, and that to me, like I always joke, I feel like Ladd McConkey could get separation in a phone booth. Like he can burn people so quick off the line. We saw it at the Senior Bowl. He was the best route runner at the Senior Bowl. He's probably the best route runner in this class outside of the top 3.
Yeah.
And that skill in itself is invaluable. We saw what Cooper Kupp was able to do with that ability out in LA. And not to compare Ladd McConkey to Cooper Kupp, because I think they're a little different. But again, just a really, really solid route runner. And then on top of that, he has the high-end speed to really separate from guys down the field as well. So
yeah,
really, really talented guy. Another guy that I like, Graham Barton, can play all 5 positions on the offensive line, which is why I think we have him up this high. He did only play in a few games this year for Duke because he did get hurt. But he can play left tackle, he can play right tackle, anything in between, and he's going to be a really solid player at the next level. I will say most likely going to be a center. So if you're specifically looking for a center, this could definitely be a guy to kind of keep in the back of your mind.
Yeah, and I think it's one of the things too for a guy that might kick inside. But I think overall talent-wise, one of the better offensive linemen in this class. But I think that his overall versatility makes that even more valuable. Because then if anybody be like, okay, we need a left guard, but put Graham Barton there, or a center, as what you talked about. So moving on now, Cooper DeJean, super athletic, we're very high on him. I think we have talked about it more, kind of come to the realization just a little bit is like he's super athletic, but can that though translate to the NFL? Like he was Iowa University football. And so not really too much else was going on with that team last year. But I think another thing as well with similar to Graham Barton is I think his overall versatility. I think something similar. I think he's like the Tyler Nubin of this quarterback class. It's like he can play outside, he can play inside, he could probably even kick back out to safety just with his overall athleticism, so to say. Yeah. I don't know if that Tyler Nubin comparison makes sense, but kind of what we were just talking about a second ago. But he's going to be a guy, a lot of defensive coordinators, like, we can just move this guy around. Also, too, something very similar as well as we saw with Kyle Hamilton go up against Travis Kelce. He can be that guy where, like, hey, we're just going to man you up against this stud tight end. And with the way tight ends are trending now, imagine Minnesota drafts Cooper DeJean and be like, hey, you're guarding Sam Laporta. That's your job. You just follow Sam Laporta around the entire time. I can see that being that type of matchup and that type of role that Cooper DeJean brings to a defense.
No, yeah, exactly. And that's why I'm so high on him. You look at his athletic pedigree, like what he did in high school and college, and just all of the state championships and college awards that he received. Probably the most accomplished athlete in this class already.
Yeah.
And his versatility is something to be said. Buffalo Bills, if he's there at 28, you guys better be sprinting to the podium, because he can cover up and play in all of the different holes that you guys have on that defense side of the ball. So
he can cover up Travis Kelce.
Yeah, exactly. So next up on the list, Jerson Newton. This is a guy I felt Illinois was kind of playing out of position for most of the year. I think he's going to be a true defensive tackle in kind of a 4-3 scheme. But when he's there and he's healthy, great against the run. He can definitely generate interior pass rush. Just a really solid defensive tackle. Not going to get moved around a lot, and has really good hands. Just a lot of really solid traits here to kind of be in the back end of this first round.
I was thinking about it earlier before we recorded, where it's like if this draft was 3 months ago, I think Jerson Newton on everybody's final mock draft would have been a top 10 pick, just with how great of a defensive tackle are. Like, he's a great player. I think he's an example of how great this defensive class is. But people have been able to see over time, just able to break down guys like Byron Murphy or some of these other guys like Jackson Powers Johnson, which has moved them up in front of Jerson Newton, just because I think maybe Jerson Newton didn't have as great of a final year, but also too, Illinois was significantly less talented than they were the year before. So yeah. I think whoever's going to get him here in the first round, whether it be in the teens, whether it be in the early or late 20s, is going to get a phenomenal defensive tackle. A lot of times we were mocking Jerson Newton, or now also Byron Murphy, going to the Las Vegas Raiders, and I still think that potentially could happen with a team like that who has a great defensive interior already, and then you just go and get this young guy and be like, hey, let's give him a couple more years to develop, get a little bit more NFL strength, and then boom, we're set. So let's wrap up the 20s here, and with Jackson Powers Johnson, the guy who's probably risen the most, I would say, up any draft board from the end of the college football season to now. Senior Bowl, I think, was obviously massive for him. And then he proved it again, I think, for the second time within the combine, that he's the top interior offensive lineman. Absolutely could see him going to a team like Seattle at 16. Could see him going to Pittsburgh at 20. Teams that need a center, shoot. Philadelphia. I mean, I know Jason Kelce moved on. You guys, I'm sure there's already a bunch of backup plans already that have been set.
Cam Jurgens is there.
Cam Jurgens.
I mean,
yeah,
he was playing guard, I believe, and now he could just stay there if you get JPJ.
Potentially so. Just very seamless. And so we'll have to go and see, but he's going to be a great center, kind of that Tyler Linderbaum of this class, I would say. So
yeah, for sure.
That's going to wrap it up here for the 40 to 21s. If you're still with us here, this episode is going to be full on. We're going to the full 2 hours, top 100. Be sure to like, subscribe, and also ring the bell if you're still with us. And I will say, with that being said, let's get into the final 20 players of our top 100 for the 2024 NFL draft class here. Starting off with J.C. Latham, offensive tackle from Alabama. It's unfortunate that his last play in college was just not his best play, because
probably his worst play, to be honest.
Probably his worst play, because he is an absolute stud. I mean, just an absolute stud. I think actually, too, let me look up here. I want to double check. I think he tested the best out of everybody by a long shot, even more than Joe Alt in the combine. Dude is just an absolute freak. 6'6", 342 pounds, 35 1/8 inch arms, 11-inch hands. He did not do any of the testing overall, but still, everybody can just go and see his.
He did the drills. He went through the drills.
He went through the drills, yeah.
And he's just, for being that big, he's so fluid. Like, it's scary to imagine him running at you at that size. And one of the things for me that really sticks out is when he gets beat, it's not because technique or anything. And keep in mind, he's also 21, I believe. He's very young. Um, he's not getting beat physically or like by his technique. It's just mental lapses. Like if you look at that last rep that you referenced, his last college rep, he's looking at the center waiting for the ball to be snapped. He's not looking at the edge rusher. And then that's when the edge rusher beats him off the edge. And then once when he gets beat, he's out of position and the edge rusher has all the leverage. So like that's my big thing with him is like you just have to kind of get him in the game mentally. And some of that will just be maturity. So I really like him here. Next up, sticking at Alabama. Do you have anything else to say about JC Latham? I realized I kind of cut you off there.
Nope, that's okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I said, yeah. You said everything I was going to say.
Okay. Next up, Terrion Arnold. Sticking to Alabama, really solid corner here. I like his versatility. He's going to be able to play as a nickelback. He's probably to start out, and then he has the versatility to go be an outside corner as well. And like being able to just shadow receivers. He's a really fluid athlete. Didn't test the best of all the corners, but I think he checked the boxes in terms of testing.
Yeah. I'd be curious to say, and it's just a little bit of a knock. It's not even fair, just because he can't control. But he is compared to Nate Wiggins and then also Quinton Mitchell. He is 6'1", I'd just be curious if that's a little bit because if that'll be a little bit of a knock compared to him and how teams view him compared to Nate Wiggins or Quinton Mitchell, who are just a couple inches taller. They're just a little bit longer in their arms.
Yeah.
Terrion Arnold's arms are 31 5/8 inch, while Quinton Mitchell is he's also 6'1", 195, 31-inch arms. So never mind. I take that back. I thought Quinton Mitchell was a little bit taller. So disregard that. So let's move on though to Nate Wiggins as well, cornerback from Clemson. Jess, I think throughout all the mock drafts, even going back to last year, everybody had Nate Wiggins up here as like a top 20 pick. It works. And so I think he's just super consistent. He's going to be your number one corner, guys that you can just lean on and just put him up against anybody. I'd say he has the potential to be your lockdown outside corner. I'd be kind of curious to see just where these guys all fall. Relative. It's something similar. Reminds me of a little bit of that J.C. Horn, Patrick Surtain from a couple years ago. It's just going to be which defensive coordinator likes that guy for their scheme more. That really is just what it's going to come down to because all these guys I think are so close together.
Yeah. No, I like Nate Wiggins. He does have a tendency to maybe like bite on first of double moves on receivers. It maybe needs like a little bit of refinement, but athletically, probably the best overall athlete of all these guys. And I know he did get hurt at the combine. I believe he pulled his groin or hurt his hip flexor. I don't quite remember.
It might have been after his 4.2840.
No, it was on the 4.2840. So I really like him as a prospect, though. Clemson has produced some great corners there. You're aware of AJ Terrell.
Yeah.
So next up, speaking of great prospects here, Byron Murphy, just as a defensive tackle, I don't know if there's much more you could do at 6'5", 300, like 6'5", 305. He gets after the passer really well. He is great against the run. He has really solid length, very fluid athlete as well, and just like so well-rounded here. Like if you're a team like the Bengals that need that defensive interior, I would have said the Raiders before today when they went and got Christian Wilkins. If they really want to solidify that defensive line, go and get Byron Murphy. But I really think he's going to come in. He's a plug and play defensive tackle for teams. He has the strength. He has the technique already. Just super solid defensive tackle here.
Yeah, he's one. Just the more and more you watch it, is kind of what I mentioned earlier with Jersey Newton. It is the more and more we've watched, and you just put him in different situations. And one of the things too, I think that makes guys go up the board is overall versatility. Like how would he work in any defense? And more you look at Byron Murphy, like he's going to work in any defense. And so, as mentioned, the Raiders I thought would have been perfect for him. I still think maybe the Broncos if they want to get him I think would be great.
Yeah.
Bengals, I can absolutely see them potentially even trading up to go and get a guy like this just to help out DJ Reader as well as a free agent, but also had a major injury towards the end of the season. So he's going to come in and potentially be like the day one starter, from the get go for any of these teams. So wrapping out this slide here, Leatu Latu, edge rusher from UCLA. Not really too much to say negative about this player. Just absolutely phenomenal.
Honestly, a really similar take on Leatu Latu to Byron Murphy, just at the edge rusher position. He's a really good athlete. He has really good technique. I will say he is a little bit older than Murphy. He's going to be 24 coming into this draft, but like just a solid edge rusher. Just he does everything very well at the edge rusher position. So
similar to Penix, his biggest concern was just his overall health.
Yeah,
but everything checked out, and it's I think to your point is the reason why he's behind Verse and Turner is just maybe a little bit of the age. If you're talking about like overall longevity, but that being said, I think Verse is only a year younger. So
yeah,
but let's move on now to 15 through 11, going with Quinion Mitchell here. He's the number one corner in the class. I would think just ran a 4.3 40. I think with his overall size and just what you see on tape and his overall athletic capabilities, I don't think that there's a team that would want this guy. Maybe they could go with Nate Wiggins if they just like the scheme fit a little bit more. But to me, I'd be looking at like if the Falcons trade back and they're looking at get a corner, I'd be like, let's get Quinion Mitchell, put him alongside AJ Terrell, or maybe do Nate Wiggins, go with the Clemson brothers. But I think Quinion Mitchell, he's come on so strong. People slowly start to hear about him. Like, he went to Toledo. Then you see him at the Senior Bowl, like, okay, this guy's legit. Then you see him at the Combine, okay, he's definitely legit. So it's going to be fascinating to kind of see where he falls, where all the corners fall, just because of how great all the other offensive players are before them, and the two edge rushers as well.
Yeah, I mean, he's my corner one for sure. He's the overall package. He has the size, the length, the speed, and even like the mentality. I talk about this a lot of times in my mock drafts when I pick Quinion Mitchell. It's just at the Senior Bowl when they were doing one-on-ones, he walked up to the line of scrimmage and called out Roman Wilson, who was one of the top receivers there, and was like, "You and me one-on-one right now. Like, let's do this." And they went blow for blow at the Senior Bowl. So just a fantastic prospect. Another guy that I really like, Troy Fatanu, he had some questions about length that were answered at the Combine. 34.5-inch arms, which is just fantastic. Could probably play all 5 positions on the offensive line, but now he's going to be slated to be a true left tackle at the NFL level. And when you go watch his tape, there's not a whole lot that you can really pick apart in terms of just technique or like moving his feet and whatnot. He's just a really well-rounded kind of plug-and-play tackle.
No, super solid. It was never a question of where, like, if Fatano was talented enough or not. It was what you talked about, which is the arm length. Is he going to be a guard? Yeah. Is he going to be a tackle? But even then, too, I think looking back on it, though, now, even like looking at Peter Skoronski last year and be like, still probably overthought a lot of that stuff then, too, if we had him fall out of the first round or late first round or something like that. So I think he's going to be at minimum a top 20 pick. Something similar, I would say, it's just going to be kind of then where do these corners fall? Where do some of these other edge rushers fall? This part of the draft is going to be so fascinating just because of the butterfly effect, so to say.
Yeah.
Because we're still at that range where it's not solidified that these guys are top 10 picks just yet. Same thing kind of with Brian Thomas Jr. He's close to a top 10 prospect. Where is he going to end up falling, though? Is he going to go in the early teens to a team like maybe Indianapolis, who like wants to take a receiver, or is Indianapolis going to be like, we can go get a receiver later on, and then same thing then with Seattle and then Jacksonville and then Cincinnati as well. But we can go get a receiver later on, and then is he going to be the guy that falls? Because he's absolutely any other draft, he's probably the first receiver off the board, top 10 pick. Because he's that talented. Clearly, I would say the 4th best receiver in this class.
Yeah. So, wait, what?
Oh, nothing. So I thought you were going to say something.
Oh, no. Brian Thomas Jr., great. I always joke he's Marvin Harrison Jr.
Yeah,
so,
that's right.
I don't really have a whole lot else to add about Brian Thomas Jr. Sorry, you were just talking and I
That's all good.
lost my train of thought. So, no, he a really solid prospect there. Next up, Olu Fashanu here at 12. I really like what he brings to the table in terms of pass blocking sets. He might struggle a little bit when running or when running the football and handling power in the passing game. But as far as technique and hand placement, he's probably the most refined tackle in this class in terms of pass blocking sets. He's always on balance. He again has really good hand placement, really really fast feet, and didn't give up a single sack or a quarterback hit this year. Only I think 3 or 7 hurries. It just a fantastic tackle prospect. Yeah, I mean, it's really close between him and Joe Alt. I think there's just a few things that Joe Alt does a little bit better that have him
well,
up a little higher on the board.
I'd almost say, and we're about to get to the guy here in a second, I think it's between him and Talise Fuaga. I think Talise Fuaga, it's almost like the opposite of what you talked about, where Olufashanu, pass blocking, great. Maybe some questions at the end of run blocking. It's like Fuaga, it's almost, I feel like it's opposite. Run blocking, like just will absolutely bulldoze whoever it is. Pass blocking, maybe there's a question too. And it's like being very nitpicky for both of those guys. So that's just, I think it's going to depend on the overall preference, I would say, for the offensive line. So wrapping up the last player here outside the top 10, Jared Verse, edge rusher from Florida State, came back for his senior season. Go back to Florida State, didn't come out last year, which was a big shock to everybody. And so still ended up, he's going to be potentially a top 10 pick, depending on if the Falcons want to take him, if the Bears want to take him, or if someone would want to trade up for him, which I don't believe will be the case. Either way, though, he's still going to be taken in the top 15, top 20, similar to kind of Brian Thomas Jr. It's just going to be just who's going to be the top guy on their board. So Jared Verse is going to be one of the top guys on everybody's board. It's just going to be how everything shakes out. Ansley could come in and has the potential to be number one edge rusher on any team. Him and Dallas Turner, I think, could go back and forth on who's going to be the number one edge rusher.
Yeah. Jared Verse, I think, has a little bit more speed to power, like to take on tackles one-on-one, whereas Dallas Turner, maybe a little bit more nuanced pass rush moves as kind of that outside linebacker role. So it's just going to be whatever's your flavor, whatever scheme you run. I think you have 2 solid options here at the top of the draft. So let's move on. You kind of already talked about Talise Fuaga when we were on Olufashanu, but one of my favorite guys in this class, just because he plays with like such controlled aggression that he does such a good job of imposing his will on defenses. And I really like his tape. He's solid in pass blocking, but he's probably the best run blocking tackle of everybody in this entire class. And I think that's why he deserves this top 10 spot here.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm the Jets, I'm seriously considering taking Fuaga over Olufashanu simply because I think he has less questions. Olufashanu, there is the questions about how he handles power. Can you get him to give that little extra oomph in the running game? And Talise Fuaga, you don't really have those questions.
Yeah.
So.
It's just going to be interesting just to see. Almost, I mentioned this earlier. It's almost going to be like that similar J.C. Horn, Patrick Surtain debate on which of these guys is going to be taken first in the top 10 or just outside the top 10. Just because they're both great at their position, they are both going to be great offensive tackles in the league. I think Olu can switch over to left tackle or be left tackle because I'm pretty sure he was at Penn State. Talise Fuaga, I think, was right tackle at Oregon State, right?
Yeah.
So I don't think Fuaga can transition over. I mean, I'm sure he can try. And
it's a harder transition,
but it is a harder transition. I think Olu it's going to be more versatile in that aspect. So that's maybe where some teams will give him a little bit of the edge. But also, too, if you're a team like New York who's picking 10th overall, would you want the more consistent guy? Especially, too, as well, if you know Breece Hall's going to be the New York Jets, by the way. Give the ball to Breece Hall, and we want to really beef up this offensive line so we can take some pressure off Aaron Rodgers. It's build that offensive line for the future, even post Aaron Rodgers as well. Do you go with a guy like Fuaga, who's going to be more consistent as of right now, or Olu, who's potentially might have a higher ceiling? So that's where it's going to be interesting. And I honestly, too, that debate I think could be the same thing as well for then Dallas Turner and Jared Verse as well.
Yeah.
So we have Dallas Turner here at 9. Dallas Turner, how and maybe I'm wrong in this, but how I've always looked at it, Dallas Turner is now that more modern day edge rusher, like lighter, super athletic off the corner that Micah Parsons esque. While Jared Verse is almost more of that traditional 4-3 down lineman type. My comp for Jared Verse was Daniil Hunter. And like they're almost the exact same size and weight. And he's more of that traditional defensive end, while Dallas Turner's that edge rusher. So it's just going to be off the overall preference. As a Falcons fan, I've thought about that. I've been going back and forth in my head because we've talked about it. It's like, what type of edge rusher would we want here? And I'm trying to think of then too with like a Raheem Morris defense. And so I can see them going back and forth on whether it's Dallas Turner or whether it's Jared Verse. Either way, like they're going to be getting phenomenal players.
Yeah. And Dallas Turner is probably the most developed pass rusher in terms of like assembling an arsenal of pass rush moves. But he is that lighter, like outside linebacker type. So it'll be interesting to see who goes first. Again, I think it just depends on what scheme that specific defense runs. So here we are, finally talking about the top 3 quarterbacks here. Starting off, we have Drake May at 8, Jaden Daniels at 7. We can talk a little bit about the difference here, but starting off with Drake May, height, weight, speed of what you want in a modern day quarterback, right? He has the arm. He's 6'4", 230, right? He has the hand size and all the measurables that you want in a quarterback. He's 21. He'll be 21 on draft day. Mm-hmm. And already 2 seasons started at North Carolina. No real apparent injury issues, knock on wood. But just his highlights are amazing. It's the in and out of each down where I struggle with him, because there's sometimes I feel like he's in complete control of the game. He knows exactly where he's going with the football. He's making adjustments and setting up defenses to be in poor spots. And then there's other times where I feel like he snaps the ball and he looks around. He's like, okay, what do I do now? And that to me, I think is what's concerning there. I do think that, like when you look at Josh Allen, Justin Herbert, those are the 2 biggest pro comps. I think that is those were some issues that both of those guys had as well. And so you just hope that that can be coached out of Drake May like it was those other guys.
Yeah. I'd be curious to kind of see then too as well, because Drake May was the reason why UNC was as relevant as they were. Same thing with Caleb Williams
for sure.
With USC. So I'd be curious to see, like, in those moments is what you're talking about, where you're like, okay, what do I do now? Is if there was something that his teammates around him they just were not nearly as good, So you go put him in a professional team setting with, especially to like hypothetically, if it is Washington that drafts him number 2 overall. I mean, he's going to have Terry McLaurin throwing to. It's going to be a lot different than throwing to Tez Walker, And so, offensive line might be about the same, but that's a separate conversation. I'm just joking. Obviously, the Commanders' offensive line is better than the North Carolina offensive line, but I digress. And that's where I think, because we do have him behind Jaden Daniels here, and I think to your point though, what Jaden Daniels can bring to the table is that elite level dual threat capability. Something that I think we might have really only see, I would say, in Lamar Jackson, but you can make an argument though that he's a better passer than Lamar Jackson already, the way that he can spin the ball. And so that's where, and as he keeps developing, it's the ceiling. He might have the highest ceiling, I would say, of these quarterbacks.
I agree,
including Caleb Williams, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think you look at the consistency just in his mechanics. He operates in the pocket really well, like when it gets messy, and then he still has that after the play breaks down kind of elusiveness and elite athleticism, and that's why I think he to me is ready to start right now. He definitely still has some areas to improve in his game. He does get lost in the middle of the field when he's making his reads sometimes, and like there's definitely areas for improvement. But he's not the project like I think Drake May is, where you have all the tools in the bag. You just got to get Drake May to be able to use them in the right situation, right? Like you're not taking a Allen wrench when you need a screwdriver, right? Like just things like that. And so Jane Daniels kind of already does that. He also has the elite athleticism to fall back on once when if things break down and he does get confused. So uh, I really like both of these guys. They're all three of these top quarterbacks are probably going to go 1, 2, 3, simply just because of the quarterback value. And I think these guys are very well deserving of it. We really only have them ranked here just because the remaining top prospects are so elite at their positions that they're already complete packages
Yeah.
of at their respective positions. And speaking of complete packages, Rome Odunze, we have above the two quarterbacks here at the number 3 wide receiver spot. He does everything well. I mean, these three guys at the top of this class uh, are really like no other prospects we've really ever seen. But we've seen the Jamar Chase once, but like never three of those type of prospects in one class.
Yeah, this seems different than if you're going off with that class of Jamar Chase, Jalen Waddle, Devontae Smith. They were all taken right there. This just seems different than that class right there. Just because but it's crazy that Rome Odunze is receiver number 3 only just because of how freaking explosive and overall well-rounded Marvin Harrison Jr. and Malik Neighbors is. But because you go look at Rome Odunze, he doesn't really do anything wrong at all.
No,
like there's nothing that isn't at worst above average.
And like if you go on his tape, you will see snaps out of the slot, snaps in a Z position, snaps as a true X receiver. And he wins at all of those positions. He wins in all of those positions off the route, setting up DBs. He wins in all of those positions with just athleticism. He wins in all of those positions in contested catch situations. There's nothing that he really does that I'm like, okay, well, he needs to improve on that, because he doesn't really drop the ball. He is consistently putting himself in good leverage positions with cornerbacks. Michael Penix he's a really good quarterback, and Rome Odunze allows him to be a Heisman candidate because he is going up and making those acrobatic catches at Washington. So I really like Rome Odunze. The scary part is, like, if he falls, I mean, like, if he goes at 8 to the Falcons, they have Kyle Pitts, they have Drake London already. If he goes to 9, where the Bears are, their second pick, okay, they now have Caleb Williams, DJ Moore, Cole Kmet, and Rome Odunze. Like, he really could be in the best situation of these 3 wide receivers, simply because he's going to go to the place that already is going to be more established and have a better roster in place already.
Or if the Chargers like him more than
exactly.
Neighbors, they're like, all right, you're going to go alongside Keenan Allen, and then you do sell Quentin Johnson and Mike Williams there as well. So it's
and then Justin Herbert's throwing him the ball.
Yeah. So he's going to go into a phenomenal situation. All these guys, I think, are going to go into a phenomenal situation, receiver wise. I mean, because even hypothetically, let's play this scenario. Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to do fine in any situation, but let's say he goes to the Cardinals. You got Kyler Murray as your QB there, and with a team who is playing extremely well. And actually, if we want to go up to the final slide as well, as we kind of start talking about these guys, but then even then, if you have Malik Neighbors going to the Giants, I still like that situation though of what Brian Dable, I think, can do. I think he fits in perfectly well with what they're trying to do in New York. And so you still pair him up with Jalen Hyatt and then Darius Slayton as well. Obviously, I know there's going to be a lot of questions about that quarterback, so that might actually be the worst situation for everybody and going to. But still, those guys are so good that they might be able to elevate the team. So Malik Neighbors, kind of as we already talked about here, we have him 5th just behind Brock Bowers. This one, I think, if we could rotate just because of the overall value, I think, of the receiver position. I think we maybe gave Brock Bowers the benefit of the doubt just because we've known about Brock Bowers for years now. I think going all the way back to his freshman year. Malik Neighbors had an amazing year, and you go look at his tape, and he's developed tremendously. So maybe
he had a good year last year, but not near what he did this year.
Yeah, I think having Jaden Daniels throwing in the ball, I think helped out a bunch, and so I think those two guys are interchangeable here. They're both such great pass catchers, and they're able. I think the biggest thing to them, especially to Brock Bowers as well, is that they're able to control that middle part of the field. And offenses now, I think, are going to be able to utilize them in so many different scenarios as well. So I kind of say that both to Rome Odunze, Malik Neighbors, and Brock Bowers, kind of
Yeah.
just continuing the conversation.
Yeah, and Malik Neighbors, there's few players whose just like raw speed affects the game as much as his does. I mean, he to me reminds me of he's in between Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill in terms of how just quick and twitchy and explosive he is, but he's doing it at 6'2", 200. Like he's not a small guy like those two are, and so he's just so enticing as a prospect. And then I think we like to get to Brock Bowers. Part of the reason why I have him above Malik Neighbors is simply because he is such a complete tight end already. Like he's 6'4", 245. He blocks well. He's so explosive with the ball in his hands. And he runs really good routes. You can line him up as an X receiver. You can line him up as your inline tight end on I don't want to say he's a sixth lineman because he is only 245, but like he could take on a linebacker for you. I mean, he could probably take on an edge rusher too if it's not a Daniil Hunter type that are like the huge guys. And like he's the complete package of a tight end. He's the best tight end prospect I think we might have ever seen.
Potentially. Yeah, I'd be curious now to see with Kirk Cousins now going to Atlanta because Kyle Pitts now had that hype. I think he still had that hype because maybe I'm biased, but it's like I haven't seen this much hype around a tight end since him and since before him. I'm trying to remember if there was another tight end.
TJ Hawkinson was really good, but he went at
he went like 15th, 16th,
yeah, 15th,
something like that. Maybe 11th. I'm trying to remember.
That's where it's like I love Kyle Pitts as a prospect, but he always was, I think, to me more of like a receiving tight end that could block, where I think Brock Bowers is that complete tight end. And I'm also biased. I grew up watching Rob Gronkowski like be that guy. So that is kind of what I look for in my favorite tight ends. And to me, Brock Bowers, obviously not to the level of Gronk, but like is that versatile.
Yeah.
So
let's wrap this up here because I think we could probably say a lot of this stuff the same about these three guys within their respective positions because we mentioned them a little bit. But Caleb Williams, number 3, Joe Alt, number 2, Marvin Harrison Jr. I think the reason for me looking at it is why these guys are better than everybody else at their position. I would just say just the intangibles. I would say things like just the overall height and speed that both Joe Alt and Marvin Harrison Jr. have. I would say the overall improvisation skills that Caleb Williams has. And it's like, I remember the first time I watched him, I've been on the East Coast here, don't really watch too many Pac-12 games unless you force yourself to stay up. And I remember just watching this USC game, like, who's this kid from USC? Looks like Patrick Mahomes. And like it's that capabilities, and you just go see his overall talent and his athleticism. It's stuff like that, things that you're not going to be able to teach Drake May. Things that go can't teach Jaden Daniels. Especially too as well. I mentioned as well. This USC team sucked this year. Like just they were not good at all. He was the only reason why that team was good. I think Brendan Rice was a solid option, but there's a reason why he's going to be picked in the 3rd round. Marshawn Lloyd as well. I think solid running back. There's a reason why there's not day 3 pick. There's a reason why I don't think there's any USC defensive players that's going to be drafted or not very high.
Kalen Bullock.
He was one. Yeah, and so there's only so much a safety could do. But I digress. Another intangible is like going then to Joe Alt, and I think the reason why, and I'll throw it over to you here in a second, but for me, Joe Alt, Marvin Harrison Jr. is it's like they're for that position. I know we use around the term generational a lot, but even as we've seen with what's going on now with the 2021 draft class, and there's only going to be one quarterback that's going to be starting out of the 5 taken in the 1st round. I think you go look at how important left tackle positions are in the overall complete team, and then the receiver position, what we see with Marvin Harrison Jr., and just he's got all the pieces put together. That's what puts those two guys ahead of Caleb Williams in my head, just because the QB position, it is a real possibility just because you're taking 1st overall could be a huge boom or bust. And so I think with Joe Alt being at 6'9", he could be one of the best left tackles that we've ever seen. He's got that measurables. And Marvin Harrison Jr. as well he's almost unstoppable. If he goes to a team with a really good quarterback, he is almost unstoppable.
Yeah, and that's. I'll touch on Joe Alt and Marvin Harrison Jr. before I do Caleb Williams. And Marvin Harrison Jr. and Joe Alt are the two best prospects I've ever seen at their respective positions. And granted, we've only been doing this for a few years, but like I go back to Penei Sewell and like the impact he's had on the Lions, and it's like, okay, Joe Alt at 20 years old, he'll be 20 when he's drafted. It has that level of impact, and that is just insane to think about. There is almost nothing, if anything at all, that I can think about of Marvin Harrison Jr.'s game that like you could really critique. Like he really is the whole package. He's fast enough. He can beat players deep. He runs exceptional routes, especially at 6'4", and there's just very few things that you could really even critique about either of these guys. And they're both doing it at such a young age, and they are just the elite of the elite. And if you get the opportunity to draft one of these guys, obviously I think quarterbacks maybe take a little bit of precedence just because of the overall value of that position. But these two guys should be the first two non-quarterbacks off the board. And
and that's what if if every team had to pick off like just who was the best player available on every single board, like this is how teams drafted, it would probably go in this order. I would say 1, 2, 3.
Yeah,
it just Marvin Harris Jr. As you said, every team needs to have that stud wide receiver, and everybody's looking for that guy. As important left tackles are. But I even think, too, if you're looking at like the New York Jets, for example, and how awful the offensive line has been, or even the New York Giants as well, when they made their playoff run, if you can get a group of receivers that can get some guys off the defensive line out of the box to help go back in the coverage, it helps take off a lot of pressure from that offensive line. One guy can only really block one or two guys for so long, so to say, but if you can get an elite receiver like Marvin Harrison Jr., it's just going to send this offense just to an absolute another level. It just because you're going to have the double coverage this guy, you're going to have to lean guys over even a little bit to just kind of put another guy in that area just to help out as much as possible, which is going to create more opportunities for everybody else. It's just this draft class is just absolutely insane. and so then for us to do the top 100, it was honestly great just to see and practice, just kind of orient ourselves even more to these players. Like, what do we like about these players more? So then come draft day, when we're live on draft night for round 1, we'll even have as best an understanding as possible to why teams might want to select this guy or might not select this guy.
Yeah. And that's, I think this whole process is just educating ourselves on these players. And then going forward, we can, when we do not just our live stream, but then our draft analysis right after the draft, I think we'll be able to give as accurate analysis as possible. So, but this was the Tracy Takes First Top 100. Please go ahead and like and subscribe. Leave a comment down below on what you thought of our top 100. Who was your favorite player that we ranked? Who was your least favorite player that we ranked? And other than that, we will see you guys next time.